time I welcomed you into my garden, we were anticipating the beginnings of a summer full of cooking. But this time, as you can see, the year has moved on. The leaves have turned and the last little apple clinging to my apple tree heralds the first days of winter. But the passing of summer isn't to be feared, because winter has its own glory, and the celebration of good food and good cooking becomes even more sharply focused. So if the weather's dull or rainy or cold and dark, fear not, because we can have all the colour and drama we need inside. Winter's a time to be warm, to be cosy, to be comforted and pampered. So I'm going to share with you some new recipes and some old favourites that will hopefully do just that. Well, from autumn leaves to salad leaves, and we're going to start our autumn collection with a warm salad made with poached eggs and frizzled chorizo. But first of all, especially for those younger viewers who might be watching, we're going to kick off with a basic cookery lesson, and that is how to poach an egg. Well, it's quite easy once somebody's shown you how. If you don't know how, it can be quite daunting. The first ingredient you need is water, and the water has to be absolutely right to poach an egg. You want it almost coming to the boil, just so that you can see a few little bubbles on the bottom of the pan, as is just beginning to happen now. Just those little bubbles coming up to the top. So that's just about ready now. The next thing you do is you just drop the eggs into the water. Doesn't need any salt or vinegar or anything, just plain water. So let's just put the first egg in. You can break it into a cup first if you want to. And then the salad is for 4 people, so we're going to do 4 eggs. So we'll put another one in. And then a third one. And the next thing I have to tell you is to be very careful that you buy very fresh eggs for poaching. They need to be fresh, so look very, very carefully at the date stamps. Date stamping is getting better and better now, and eggs are getting fresher and fresher to buy, so you just have to be a bit careful about that. So there's the 4 eggs. They're in the water. If they just stick out at the top here, you can do what you do when you actually fry an egg, and that's just baste it a little bit with the water. And then just leave them like that for exactly 1 minute. And you need to put a timer on, because otherwise you forget or the phone rings, so just 1 minute. And then the next stage is you remove the pan from the heat, put the eggs aside and leave them, put the timer on again, this time for 10 minutes. And that gives you plenty of time to carry on and make the salad dressing. And you start off with a good, solid, heavy frying pan and a tablespoon of olive oil, and you heat it, well, hot as you dare. It's got to be really hot, because we want to frizzle this, which is chorizo sausage. Now, chorizo is a Spanish pork sausage flavoured with paprika, and you can buy it either in a large piece or sometimes in smaller sausages which come in packs. But either way, this is how they should be cubed for the salad. And then following the sausage, we're going to add 1 medium onion, that's also been finely chopped. Stir that into the hot oil. And then, keeping the Spanish theme and the paprika flavours, we've got 1 red pepper that's also been chopped in the same way. And then we're going to add 2 cloves of garlic, and these have been also finely chopped. Then just move it around the pan so that all of that hits this very, very high heat. I've got the heat on full, because what we want is nice toasted, frazzled edges to this, which gives a nice flavour to the salad. And you need to leave that now for about 6 minutes. Then, after the 6 minutes, we're going to add the rest of the ingredients. First, a little bit of seasoning of salt and freshly milled pepper. And then we're going to add 2 more tablespoons of olive oil. And that will be followed by 1.5 tablespoons of sherry vinegar. And this is what's making the dressing. And then finally 3 tablespoons of dry sherry. 1, 2, 3. Let that all bubble and amalgamate together. And that's the salad dressing already. Turn the heat out. And now we'll go and look at the poached egg. If you don't like the little raggedy edges, if you're serving this, you can just take a knife there and cut it a little bit. I don't mind too much of that. Then what you do is you take a wad of kitchen paper and a good draining spoon, because you don't want any water in the salad, and then lift the poached egg out of the water and hold it onto the kitchen paper like that, just so that the excess water can drain off. And I hope you can see how beautiful that egg is. The white is set and the yolk will be just nice and creamy, which will be perfect for the salad. So we'll now take it over, put it onto the salad leaves. And now all I need to do is get the dressing. And this, as I said before, is enough for 4 people. Just sprinkle it over the salad. And then there's one more ingredient that's going to go on. And that is this one here, which is croutons. And these croutons have been baked in the oven with paprika to keep the flavours the same. And I'll be showing you how to make those a little later on. So that is warm poached egg salad with frizzled chorizo. Well, that's the first of our winter warm-ups. Now I'd like to show you another really good warm winter salad. I think we should eat lots more pulses actually, and this one is made with the tiny little pui lentils. It's called warm goat's cheese and lentil salad. You start by frying 1.5 ounces of roughly chopped walnuts in a tablespoon of olive oil and then remove them to a plate. This is a finely chopped small red onion, and it's been softened with a chopped garlic clove. Add 8 ounces of pui lentils, a bay leaf and some chopped thyme leaves. Then add 10 fluid ounces of boiling water, but don't add any salt at this stage. Simmer the lentils gently for 30 to 40 minutes. Now prepare the dressing. This is sea salt, mustard powder and garlic that has been crushed to a paste. And to this you add 2 tablespoons of balsamic vinegar. That's followed by 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, and finally 2 tablespoons of walnut oil. As soon as the lentils are tender, season them with salt, then mix them while they're warm with the dressing. Add some rocket leaves, then crumple some goat's cheese all over. Any goat's cheese is fine, but I like crottin best for this. Finally, sprinkle on the sautéed walnuts. Well, after the success of Caesar salad in the summer collection, I have been searching for another recipe that would really match that salad, which proved to be so popular. And I think I found one on a visit to Normandy. This is apple cider salad with a melted camembert dressing. But first of all, I want to talk to you about buying camembert, because for years I never quite got my camembert right. It was either underripe or over the top. So I thought now's the time to really get to grips with how to buy a camembert to make this absolutely incredible salad. So I want to run you through now. It takes about 4 to 5 weeks to actually make a camembert for it to mature to the right point. And I've got in front of me now an early one that hasn't matured very far. And this you can tell because it's got a really white sort of furry crust clinging all around the edge of the camembert. And that's quite firm, really almost like a cheddar when you touch it. Now this is a medium ripe camembert here, and what happens as it begins to ripen, it's stored at cellar temperature, the little bits of crust inside the camembert begin to show through the white, and you see it's just beginning to poke through all the way around the edge there. And then finally, when the camembert is ripe, first of all you've got the squidge test, which is in the middle, you can see that there. And then, as you can see, it begins to look almost reddish. The brown is poking through everywhere. There's also quite a bit of wrinkling there, and that is a ripe camembert. Now let's go through the whole lot again and show you inside what it looks like. So the early one, when you cut it in half, you find you've got that patch there of unripened, the paler patch in the centre. And then the medium one should have a smaller bit. This is almost ready, this one here. You've just got that very pale piece of camembert there in the centre, so that would eat very nicely. And this one, which is ready today, is going to be lovely and ripe and soft and creamy. And I just hope you can see that lovely sort of, just that bit of squidge. It shouldn't be running, but it should be really nice and creamy like that in the centre. Now, how can you get your camembert to be like that when you want to make this salad? What you've got to do is watch the date stamp like a hawk. Try, if possible, to get an unpasteurised camembert, because like all unpasteurised cheeses, it has a much more flavour. And look at the date stamp, and the date stamp will tell you the exact day. Now, in this country, that means you've got to plan to eat camembert. When you pick it up, it'll probably be a fortnight's time, so put it in the garage or in a cool place, which is almost as good as a cellar, and let it ripen, and then eat it on the day it's ready, and you'll be able to enjoy it at its absolute best. Well, now I want to show you how to make the camembert dressing, and what you need to have is one ripe or almost ripe camembert, and the easiest way to deal with it is to cut it in half like this, first of all, have a really sharp knife, and then peel it the way you would peel an apple. Just run the sharp knife along the rind like this, taking it as close as you can away from the creamy camembert inside. Now, I won't have time to finish this. I'm just going to take a little bit more off there. But we'll move over, because we've got one, as usual, that is actually just beginning to melt on the hob here. The whole camembert, when the rind is off, goes into the saucepan, and then you put it on the most gentle heat you can give it. It mustn't be too high, the heat, and if you're worried about it, use a heat diffuser. And then it has another ingredient, a lovely Normandy ingredient that comes from the same area as the camembert, and that is creme fraiche. And when you see the colour of the creme fraiche, this is 2 tablespoons. You can see how they're related, can't you? They've both got that stunning creamy colour that you don't find anywhere else in the world other than in dairy products. Now, just stay with it. It's going to take about 3 or 4 minutes. Now, if your camembert isn't quite ripe, all you need to do is add another ingredient, 1 or 2 tablespoons of dry cider. Right, that's just about ready now, but first of all, I want to talk to you about croutons, because this salad is improved if it's got lots of crunchy croutons. And the way to make these, I'm just going to recap, although we did it on the summer collection, is you put cubes of bread, small cubes of bread, the smaller the better, in a bowl with a crushed clove of garlic, like that. Earlier we had paprika on them, but this time we're using garlic. And then you use a tablespoonful of really good olive oil, and just mix it all up together until they're thoroughly soaked in the oil. Pop them onto a baking sheet, onto a high shelf in a medium oven, and they'll turn crisp and golden and crunchy like these here in exactly 10 minutes. So now we're going to actually make the salad, and here it is. And the salad ingredients are, I think this is a hot dressing, so we need robust salad leaves. So what I'm using here is cos and rocket leaves. And then I've also got some thin slices of Cox's apple, skin left on, that have just been dipped into cider, then patted dry, just to stop them from browning. Now, let's have a look at the dressing. And what I haven't mentioned so far is that you can make this the day before if you want to. Keep it refrigerated, and then just pop it back on the heat until it becomes a nice creamy mass, as you can see here. And then let's just now have a look at the consistency. Yes, that's what we want to pour over the salad leaves. Something that looks like that. I'll just do it again so you can just see how luscious and gorgeous that is. So the hot dressing now is poured over the salad leaves. So pour half the dressing on now, and then take the other half to the table. And then the final touch is to add some crunchy croutons, and you have the very nicest, probably the very nicest winter salad of all. What I want to show you now is this wonderful autumnal braised dish, which is called pork braised in cider vinegar sauce, and for my money, I think this is one of the best braised dishes I've come across in a long time. Now what you need for this is shoulder of pork. It's very important to have the right cut. You might buy it in a piece like that, in which case you'll trim off the rind and the fat there. When that's off, the piece of meat looks like this here, and you can ask a butcher to do that for you, to trim it for you, so that you end up coming home with it like this. But if you're thinking, well, I can see lots of sort of fat and membrane there, the thing you need to learn about meat cookery is that that's very important for braising. If you get really lean meat for braising, then it ends up dry at the end of the cooking time. So all this sort of little bits of membrane and fat are very important. So you've got to do the work then of trimming it up into little pieces like this, little bite-sized pieces. Then, in a cooking pot, here I've got a shallow oven-proof casserole. And I'm going to brown the meat. I've got a little bit of butter and some ground nut oil. And I'm going to brown the meat before I put the rest of the ingredients in. I just want to explain a little bit about browning meat. First of all, you need the pan really hot. And then the next thing you need to know is don't overcrowd the pan. If you put a lot of meat in at once, steam develops and it'll never brown, not in a million years. So just remember to only put in a few pieces at a time. It doesn't need to be in there for too long because it's going to get browned in the oven eventually. So just carry on like that, a few batches at a time. The next thing you do is add shallots to the pan, and I've got 12 peeled shallots here, and they've just been lightly browned. And now I'm going to add the next ingredient, which is a pint of medium cider. And I'm using medium cider because I think pork needs a little bit of sweetness. So in goes the cider. That gives a touch of sweetness, and then we need a touch of sharp. And the touch of sharp is this, which is 1/4 of a pint, or 5 fluid ounces, of cider vinegar. And if you're using cider vinegar, try and get the best cider vinegar you can, because it does make a difference. Now we're going to return the meat to the pan, so that can go back in to join the shallots and the cider and cider vinegar. And after that, I'm going to add some seasoning of salt and pepper, and then some herbs. And I'm just going to add a few sprigs of fresh thyme here, perhaps about 4 sprigs altogether, and a couple of bay leaves. Now, the interesting thing about this braised dish is it goes into the oven without a lid. You can see it's a wide, shallow pan. And what happens is it goes into a preheated oven, gas Mark III or the equivalent, without a lid, and then in 1 1/4 hours, which is the time it takes to cook, what happens is the liquid reduces down and concentrates into the most unbelievable sauce. So we'll just put that into the oven now and give it the cooking time. Right, well, just in case you don't have a shallow casserole that will go into the oven like that, I suggest you use a 10-inch round or square shallow dish, but don't forget to preheat it first so that when that comes up to simmering point, it goes into a hot dish into the oven. Well, now I want to show you what to serve with that. And the first recipe I want to show you is the potato recipe of this autumn, and it's called potato and apple rosti. These potatoes have been boiled for 8 minutes, then cooled, and now I'm grating them on the coarse side of a grater. This is Granny Smith apples, grated as well, and they've been tossed in lemon juice to keep their colour, and then the excess juice is squeezed out before they join the potatoes. Season at this stage with salt, pepper and freshly grated nutmeg, then shape the mixture into small cakes. Finally, dust with flour and chill until you're ready to cook them. Brush the little rosti cakes with melted butter, pop them into a preheated oven, gas Mark VII, and after 10 minutes, turn them over. Give them another 10 minutes cooking time until they become crisp and golden. Once upon a time, autumn used to mean apples and pears, but now autumn means another beautiful fruit fresh over from New England, and that's the cranberry. And if limes were flavour of summer when we did the summer collection, I can tell you cranberries are definitely the flavour of autumn in this series. And the recipe we're going to make today is spiced sautéed red cabbage with cranberries. Now you start off in a nice big pan with lots of room to play, and you have 1 onion, a medium onion, finely chopped, and a fat clove of garlic, finely chopped, and you soften that for a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, in a dessert spoon of a flavourless oil like ground nut oil. So now we're going to, while that's happening, we're going to deal with the red cabbage, and you need 1 pound of red cabbage for this, and sometimes you can get small ones that come approximately a pound, otherwise you probably need a half. And what you do is you just cut it into half or into quarters if it's a large one, take out the core and the ribby bits and then shred it finely. Now you can either shred it with a sharp knife, or you can shred it with a food processor, or you can hunt around and find one of these wonderful little gadgets here. This is a Japanese mandolin. It has a very sharp blade, so you have to be very careful, watch your fingers. But it does actually shred cabbage and other things really, really finely, really, really well, and really, really quickly, as you can see there. And you can use it for all sorts of other things, which I'll be showing you later on in the series. Now, I haven't got time to do all that, but I do have 1 pound of red cabbage finely shredded, and we'll take that over now to the cooking pan and turn the heat up high. And what you need to do now is get the heat really hot, the onions nicely softened, and then as soon as that's really, really hot, pile in the red cabbage. What needs to happen now is you need to stir it, keep it on the move, and let it mingle with the onions, and then, still leaving the heat high, we're going to add the spices. And the spices I'm going to use are 1/3 of a whole nutmeg grated, and always use whole nutmeg, never ready grated, because it soon loses all its kick if you buy it ready grated. And then I'm going to use 1/3 of a teaspoon, a rounded teaspoon of cinnamon. That's what that looks like. And ground cloves, but this time 1/3 of a level teaspoon of ground cloves, which looks like that. Give it another stir. I'll give it some pepper and salt now as well. And then just keep it stirring like that, with the heat fairly high, for about 3 to 4 minutes. Then after about 3 or 4 minutes on the high heat, you can then add 4 ounces of fresh cranberries. Then the whole thing begins to take on even more delightful colour. Now what happens with the cranberries is as they cook, some of them will begin to burst and release all their juices, which is very nice, and others will stay whole, which will look very pretty. And then you carry on cooking it on a low heat for another 5 to 10 minutes. Now, you'll have to do a bit of biting and tasting, because it depends on how finely you shredded your cabbage as to how long that second lot of cooking will take. And you can see some of the cranberries now have smashed up a little bit, popped and released their juices, but some of them have remained nicely whole. And we're just going to add 2 more ingredients now. Turn the heat up and then add 1½ tablespoons of red wine vinegar and a heaped dessert spoon of dark, soft brown sugar. Stir that in, let that all bubble and melt, and then the red cabbage is ready to serve. But the good news about this recipe is that it's very, very well behaved, and what you can do with that is cook it early on in the day if you want to, and then just reheat it very gently, and it tastes just as good. If anything, the flavours seem to develop even more. Now I think it's time to just have a look at the pork, so we'll get that out of the oven. And there, what you can see is that the juices that we put in, the cider and cider vinegar, have reduced down quite a lot, and the pork and the shallots have continued to brown. So what you do now is you remove the meat from the juices so that you can reduce them down to make the sauce. Now you can see that the juices have concentrated and reduced to half their original volume. So now I'm going to just return the meat to the juices, and the finishing touch to the sauce for this is this, and this is 1.5 tablespoons of creme fraiche. And what we're going to do with that is just blend it, keeping the heat low now, just blend it in to the meat. And the lovely thing about creme fraiche is it doesn't split when you add it to heat. It's lovely to use in cooking. And then as soon as that's all blended into the juices, it's ready to go to the table. But what are we going to have for dessert? Well, here's a little selection from the winter collection. First of all, an unusual kind of apple pie. This has got 4 pounds of apples in it, but the pastry crust, as you can see, has got little flecks in it. That's because it's made with cheddar cheese. Next door, we've got a cranberry jelly, which is very nice to serve chilled after quite a rich meal in the party season. Then we've got a prune and apple and armagnac cake, and it's got an almond streusel topping which is made with slivered toasted almonds. Now if you remember the one crust pie that we made in the summer collection, this is the winter version, and this is made with spiced apples and raisins. If you want something cool after a rich meal, then I think you'd like apple soufflés. These are iced apple soufflés and they live in the freezer, and they've got a caramelised apple topping. Then something very colourful. The rich jewel-like arrangement that you can see there is grilled autumn fruits. These have got butter and sugar. They're put under the grill, served with their own syrup and a cider sabayon sauce. Well, on the summer collection we used masala, sweet masala wine, and it works really well if you use it with pears. And the pears, you can buy them rock hard and simmer them slowly in masala wine with cinnamon and vanilla pods, and then you get this wonderful, gorgeous autumnal colour glaze on them and a lovely flavour too. And cranberries, I told you cranberries were the flavour of this autumn, and these are one crust pies mini versions. These are individual portions of one crust pies and filled with the wonder of cranberries. Well, that's the beginning of our winter collection, but there's lots more to come, and I hope you'll come back next week when we're going to be doing warm soups and hot suppers. See you then. Well, now we're into the season of bonfires and the hallowed eve of All Saints, so that means fun and chill on the outside, and then afterwards some warm soups and hot suppers inside. Well, one thing that Halloween and bonfire night heralds is the arrival of this beautiful creature here, the pumpkin. Pumpkins will now be in season up until Thanksgiving Day, and I want to show you a recipe for making pumpkin soup. Now, pumpkin doesn't have a lot of flavour of its own, but if it's made into a soup, the texture is really velvety and lovely, and it makes a wonderful soup. Now, what you do with the pumpkin is you treat it exactly the same as a melon, and you cut it up like a melon, and then, just like a melon, you take the seeds out, scrape them off into a bowl, and then your pieces of pumpkin are all ready to go into the oven and be roasted. Now, to roast them in the oven, you need a blast of high temperature. So you preheat the oven to its very highest setting. Now that means you've got to have this, which is a really solid roasting tray, because cheaper roasting trays just buckle in the high heat. So there we are, we're going to put the pumpkin onto the roasting tray in a little assembly line like that, and then before it goes into the oven, it just needs a little bit of seasoning of salt and pepper, and then we're just going to brush it with the merest trace of oil. And you need to have a flavourless oil for this, so I'm using ground nut oil or that's sometimes called peanut oil, which doesn't have any flavour but helps to give it that nice sort of charred, crusty texture that we're looking for, which does enhance the flavour of the pumpkin. Now that goes into your very high hot oven and you leave it there for about 25 minutes to roast until the pumpkin becomes tender. Right, now while the pumpkin is roasting, you start to make the soup in a large cooking pot like this. Start off with a large onion, chopped, as you can see, fairly small, and brown it in 1 ounce of butter over a high heat to get it nice and golden. Then turn the heat down to low and let the onion just sweat very gently for about 20 minutes and just mellow down and release all its lovely oniony juices. Then we're going to add 3/4 of a pint of whole milk, 1.5 pints of vegetable stock or any stock you like. You then bring it up to a gentle simmer and then you add the roasted pumpkin. And what happens to the pumpkin is that it comes out of the oven. When it comes out of the oven, it sort of looks rather like this. The little gondolas have got nice and charred around the edges. And the skin comes off the pumpkin quite easily because the pumpkin's soft. Now when you're roasting it and you want to know if it's cooked or not, just stick a skewer into it. And if it feels nice and tender, then the pumpkin is cooked. Then just chunk it up, as I've done here. And the pumpkin is now ready to join the rest of the soup over here, which is just coming up to simmering point. So in it goes. Stand well back because of splashes. Give it a good stir, and I think we'll have just a little bit more seasoning of salt and pepper. We can do a bit of tasting later. And I think one very subtle addition that's very nice is this, which is whole nutmeg. Grate it yourself, just a few scrapings like that. That'll now come back to simmering point, and it'll take about 15 to 20 minutes to be ready to then be pureed. Right, here's the finished soup, which has been liquidized, but I've also quickly passed it through a sieve because pumpkin does have a few fibrous bits, and now you can see how lovely and smooth and velvety it is. But what I haven't told you that this isn't just roasted pumpkin soup, it's roasted pumpkin soup with melting cheese. And the melting cheese in this case is an Italian cheese called Fontina, which has a very, very quick melting quality. If you can't get Fontina cheese, then you can use Gruyere cheese, which also tastes good and actually has a good melting quality. Now, really, you should just leave that for 1 minute. Don't let it come back to simmering point, but just leave it for 1 minute and then take it hot to the table, ready to serve into your soup bowls. Then, as a finishing touch, add a swirl of creme fraiche, or it could be double cream, and a sprinkling of grated Fontina or Gruyere. And that's it, roasted pumpkin soup with melting cheese. Well, that was a mild and mellow soup. Now I want to show you, by way of contrast, something spicy and hot. This is Libyan soup with couscous. First, brown 6 ounces of finely chopped raw lamb in a tablespoon of hot oil. Now in the same pan, brown a large chopped onion and 2 finely chopped cloves of garlic. Next, you dry roast and crush 1 heaped teaspoon of coriander seeds and 1 heaped teaspoon of cumin seeds. After that, 2 more spices, mild chili powder and powdered allspice. The meat is now returned to the pan before you stir in 5 ounces of tomato puree, a fresh green chilli and 2 teaspoons of caster sugar. Add a pint of ready-made lamb stock and a pint and a half of water. Next, 4 ounces of chickpeas. These have been soaked overnight in cold water and then drained. Stir the soup now and let it simmer very gently with a lid on for about an hour. Then, just before serving, add 2 ounces of couscous, a tablespoon of chopped parsley, the same of chopped mint, and leave it to stand for 3 minutes. Serve with a lemon wedge for each person to squeeze into the soup and some warm pita bread to go with it. Well, Well, now I want to show you a real star of a soup. This is black bean soup, and it's going to be served with a black bean salsa, which is nice to have this sort of combination of really hot but something chilled to go with it. Well, we're going to start by making the soup. In my pot here, I've got 2 tablespoons of olive oil. They've just been brought up to heat. And now I'm going to add pancetta. And this is Italian cured bacon. Now, pancetta comes, as you can see there, in packets, in flat slices. It has quite a lot of fat on it, but you don't have to worry about the fat because the fat renders down during the cooking. Now, what you should be doing with that now is just giving it about 5 minutes to become golden and a little bit crispy. And then, to the soup pot, we're going to add lots of other ingredients. And the first of those ingredients is a large onion, which has been chopped. So that goes in to join the pancetta. Second one is swede, and that's been diced. And then next to the swede there you can see carrot. So a large onion, 2 ounces of swede and 2 ounces of carrot. And then we're coming to another ingredient that you might be familiar with if you watch the summer collection, and that is coriander. And what I'm using here are the stalks. And this little heap here is a clove of garlic, which has been, a nice fat clove of garlic, which has been previously crushed. Now just turn those vegetables around in the juices, keep the heat low, and then the principle of soup making is always to draw out all the flavours and all the juices. So what we're going to do is just put a lid on and leave that to just sweat and release all the juices for about 10 minutes. Now, while that's happening, I just want to talk to you about black beans, because they're the star of the soup, really. And the good thing about them is they don't have a great deal of flavour of their own, but what they are good at is absorbing other flavours. Now, to deal with those, what you need to do is put a little note on the fridge and remind yourself to soak them overnight, because that's the easiest thing to do, is just cover them with twice their volume of water, soak them overnight, and then the next day they look like this. They're sort of swollen up, and then they're ready to make the soup. Now, if you forget to do that, you can bring them up to the boil and boil them for 10 minutes and leave them for 3 hours. So if you do forget the note on the fridge, you know, all isn't lost. Now, after 10 minutes, you take the lid off the saucepan and you add the soaked and drained beans. So we'll do that now. In they go. It's very nice looking, this soup. I always enjoy making black bean soup because they're so pretty. Now we're going to add some other flavours. Here I've got a teaspoonful of cumin seeds, and what's happened to these is they've been dry roasted in a frying pan, and I'm going to show you how to do that a bit later on, and then crushed with a pestle and mortar. And then the final ingredient is this, to give it a little bit of a kick, which is Tabasco sauce, and you need a teaspoonful of Tabasco sauce, which comes out of the bottle quite slowly and wisely, because if you add too much it blows your socks off. So there we go. Teaspoonful of Tabasco sauce, and stir all that in. And I have to remind you that when you're using dried pulses that have been soaked, don't put any salt in at this stage. You salt soup made with beans and lentils at the end, because salt tends to draw out moisture, and what we're trying to do is get moisture into them. Final ingredient is stock, and I've got 2 pints here of chicken stock, or it can be vegetable stock, or any stock you like. And nowadays, if you don't have time to make stock, it's quite easy now to buy even fresh stock in little tubs in the supermarket. Give that a stir, bring it up to a gentle simmer, leave the heat as low as possible, put a lid on, and leave it to cook for 1.5 hours. To make the salsa, first place 3 tablespoons of the cooked beans into a serving bowl. Add a skinned and de-seeded finely chopped tomato, a fat green chilli, de-seeded and chopped, and a finely chopped red onion. Now some fresh coriander leaves, 1 tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil, and the juice of half a lime. Taste it now, add some seasoning, then mix it well and leave it aside for an hour for the flavours to develop. Then what happens to this soup is it gets whizzed to a puree, and what you end up with is this lovely, soft, smooth, creamy textured soup. And as a contrast with the hot soup, we're just going to put a swirl of creme fraiche in and then top that with the black bean salsa. Well, all I can say is I just can't wait for you to taste that. You're going to love it. And now I'd like to introduce you to the complete winter soup collection. Beetroot, well, you either love it or hate it, but I bet anyone at all would adore this velvet-textured Polish beetroot soup, served with a garnish of soured cream and grated beetroot. This is chickpea and chilli soup, and this one's served with a garnish of finely shredded red and green chilli and some coriander leaves. These are fried, crisp shavings of parsnip, and they're served as a garnish to this slightly sweet curried parsnip and apple soup. Now you're about to see black bean soup again, but here it is, this time served in the same bowl as another soup, white Tuscan bean soup with a garnish of frizzled shallots and pancetta. This one's a real winter warmer, French onion soup topped with croutons and melted cheese and underneath a wonderful mass of slowly cooked caramelised onions. And to finish, a soup with a Scottish influence. This is smoked haddock chowder and it's served with little poached quail's eggs. Autumn and winter do have a lot of pluses, you know. What you can do is lock yourself into the kitchen and get to work making a preserve, something that will take you all through the winter. So find yourself a little spare time and make a fresh and sun-dried tomato chutney. And we're going to start off here with sun-dried tomatoes. I just want to explain these to you because although they've taken the nation by storm a bit, get a bit boring sometimes on menus, these you're probably not used to seeing because these are not preserved in oil. They're just dried and left as they are. And what you do with these is you put them into some warm water and then just let them soak for about 20 minutes to be reconstituted. And then they're going to be combined with fresh tomatoes, 4 pounds of fresh tomatoes, and the combination of the dry and the fresh tomatoes together really gives the most wonderful concentrated flavour to the chutney. Now I'm going to take you through the method, but first of all we're going to deal with the spices. And the spices I'm using are whole coriander seeds and whole mustard seeds. But the first thing I want to do is dry roast them to just draw out the flavour. So my pan here has been sitting on the heat, getting really nice and hot, and I'm just going to add the spices to the pan, coriander first, and then mustard seeds. And then what happens here is you just let them sort of drift around in the heat, no oil, nothing, for about a minute or so. And I hope, looks very pretty like that, doesn't it? I hope that what will happen soon is they'll begin to burst and come to life and start popping. That's it, right. Now before they all escape, transfer them to a pestle and mortar and then just give them a little crush. And they don't need to be very finely crushed, just coarsely crushed. And then what happens is the tomatoes are all finely chopped. But what we've done is we've used a food processor here, and I've got them already in the preserving pan. And what I've done is chopped the sun-dried tomatoes first on their own. They're quite hard to chop, so you do them on their own. Put them into the preserving pan, followed by the fresh tomatoes. And the good news on the fresh tomatoes is they don't need skinning for chutneys. Now the next ingredient I'm going to use is chilies and garlic. And I've got 4 chilies here and 4 cloves of garlic. And I'm leaving the seeds in the chilies because this chutney does have a little bit of kick to it, which I think is very nice. I've got 2 red peppers here. They're going in to the processor as well. And now we're just going to give those a little whiz and chop them roughly the same size as the tomatoes. So it doesn't matter if it's grey and dull outside because you can get all the dazzling colour you want inside if you make some chutney. Now in they go to join the tomatoes. I'm just going to give the tomatoes, the 2 kinds of tomatoes, a stir first, and then they'll go in. What a stunning colour they are. You'll have time to scrape that a bit more carefully than I have. Next ingredient is going to be some onions, and here I've got 4 large onions, and these have also been processed earlier in the processor, so they'll go in next. And some salt, a dessert spoon of salt, and we won't forget those wonderful spices, they're going to go in. So everything's going in together. And then the next ingredient is sugar, very, very important ingredient in preserving. And in this case, I'm using 8 ounces of soft, dark, soft brown sugar. So that goes in next. And then, if you're thinking, wow, 8 ounces sounds, so that's going to be quite sweet. It isn't, because the other preserving ingredient, perhaps the main ingredient of all in a chutney, is vinegar. And in this case, I'm using a pint of cider vinegar, so that goes in. And then you just leave it to simmer very, very gently, just slightly bubbling, and you leave it for 3 hours, and then you give it a test to see how it's doing. Right, now the chutney's had almost all its cooking time, and you can see here where we started, there's a sort of a like tide mark there, and it's gone down to nearly half its original volume. And the way you tell if it's cooked is you take a wooden spoon and you just draw it across the centre like this, making a trail through the chutney. Now, if that channel fills up with vinegar, as you can see that's doing now, then it does need about another 10 to 15 minutes. So you just leave it, give it another 10 to 15 minutes, and then give it another test. Well, now the chutney really is ready. If you stir it round now and you just make a trail with your spoon, you see it doesn't fill up with vinegar. It's absolutely perfect. The chutney is potted into warm, sterilised jars and then kept for 8 weeks before serving it, for instance, with a homemade hamburger. Or a good old British banger. Or a sandwich made with ciabatta bread and Italian cheese. What you're seeing before you now is a work of art, but it's also an edible work of art, because these are dried porcini mushrooms. And what I want to show you today is how to make a wild mushroom risotto, a classic Italian risotto. But besides porcini mushrooms, we also have rice. And this has to be proper risotto rice. Now, the one I've got here is called carnarole. You can use another one called arborio or another one called nano, but you must make sure it's called risotto rice because it's very important to this. And let me just show you the difference. If you look at long grain rice now, when you see the long grains, you can see how tiny they are and thin. And then you see these lovely sort of robust fat grains of rice, and that's what you need for risotto because they stay sort of al dente in the middle, which gives you texture, and then you get the lovely sort of creaminess around the edge. Now you start your risotto in a medium-sized saucepan, and you need to have 2.5 ounces of butter, and you melt the butter, and then as soon as it comes up to heat and just begins to sizzle like that, you add a medium onion, and the medium onion has been fairly finely chopped. Turn the heat down at that stage, then just give it a little stir and let the onion begin to cook gently while you deal with the mushrooms. Now, first of all, the porcini mushrooms, you actually only need 1/2 ounce. And what you do is you put them in a jug, pour a pint of boiling water over them and leave them to soak for about 1/2 hour. And then take a sieve, line it with a double sheet of kitchen paper and strain the mushroom soaking liquor through it because you want to use this in the risotto. Now, the reason you do this is because they are wild mushrooms and they sometimes have a little bit of grit and dust in them, so this is just to take the precaution to get that out. So just let that drip through, and we're also going to use in the risotto some fresh mushrooms because the combination of the dried and the fresh gives the most wonderful mushroom flavour. And these mushrooms, this is 8 ounces here, of nice open dark gilled mushrooms because they have the best flavour. And what I'm going to do is cut them into roughly 1/2 inch size pieces. This might look a bit big, but actually as they cook, the mushrooms, as you know, reduce down in size. And so you need them quite chunky to begin with. Now, originally, making a classic Italian risotto involved quite a bit of hard work, really. Well, not hard work, but what you had to do was you had to stand by the saucepan and stir, then add a little bit more liquid and stir, then add another little bit more liquid. And really, it meant that the person making the risotto couldn't sort of enjoy a pre-supper drink because you had to be standing over the stove, literally. So I've devised a method whereby we're going to make this risotto in the oven. It has all the same taste and flavour, but it's actually made in the oven. And the fresh mushrooms are going to go in to join the butter and onion. It happened one day while I was making a rice pudding, and I thought, wow, why should you stand for hours when you can just put a rice pudding in the oven? And so we tried it, and it worked, and here it is. Now you just stir the mushrooms into the buttery juices, and then add the porcini. And what you do with the porcini is you just squeeze them really hard to get all the juice out, and then just chop them finely. Now when you go to buy porcini, you'll think they're very, very expensive, but in fact, as I've already said, you're only using a small amount, so if you actually work out the cost, it isn't expensive. And make up your mind whether it's expensive after you've tasted, because the flavour, for anyone who loves mushrooms, I promise you, the flavour is out of this world. I mean that literally. So there they go, in to join the fresh mushrooms. And now, keeping the heat low, you just need to let the mushrooms and onions just gently sweat and release their juices, and that'll take about 20 minutes. Then after about 20 minutes, you'll see everything sort of shrunk down to much smaller size now. The next thing you do is you add the rice, and the rice is actually 6 ounces, and you just add the rice. This is weighed on the scales, not as with the other rice. Just add the rice and stir it till all the grains are nicely coated in the buttery, mushroomy juices. And next we're going to add the liquid. First the straining liquor, which is here, that goes in next. And then lastly the Madeira, and I'm using actually 1/4 of a pint of this lovely nutty dry Madeira. Now we're going to let that come up to simmering point. I'll turn the heat up there. Up to a gentle simmer, add a good seasoning of salt and freshly milled pepper, and then what I'm going to do is transfer it to the oven. It's very important when you're making an oven-baked risotto to have the dish hot. So what you do is when you're preheating the oven, you put the risotto dish in to preheat as well. And perhaps I better tell you a little bit about the size of this dish. This one is actually 9 by 9 by 2 inches deep. But you can, if you want to, use a 9-inch round diameter, shallow dish like this. And we're going to transfer the risotto mixture into the dish. And the reason you need that dish really hot is because if it wasn't hot, when you've poured everything into it and put it back in the oven, it's going to take a while to come back to simmering point. And it does actually need to come back to simmering point before you cook it. Now just give it one stir with the wooden spoon, and then transfer it back into the oven to cook. After 20 minutes in the oven, the risotto has another star ingredient added to it, and this is Parmesan cheese, but not any Parmesan cheese, 2 tablespoons of grated Parmigiano Reggiano, which is the best Parmesan cheese in the world. We've got the best mushrooms and the best Parmesan cheese. Sprinkle that in, then just give it a little stir around, like that, so it's going to taste even more wonderful. And then, back in the oven, again, no lid, and give it a further 15 minutes cooking time. After 15 minutes, you take the risotto out of the oven and just cover it with a cloth while you get everybody seated. It has to be eaten fairly quickly because the rice goes on absorbing the liquid. Have some nice hot plates ready, get everybody seated, and before you serve it, I just want to show you what a risotto should actually be like. And here you can see we've got lovely sort of fat grains of rice with still some definition in them, still some bite in them, but also there's quite a bit of creaminess, just a tiny little bit of liquid and a little bit of creaminess around it. And before you serve it, it's going to have one more ingredient, and that's a little bit more Parmesan cheese, and let everybody help themselves to a little bit more when they eat it. Well, I hope I've been able to prove to you just how simple it is to make a really superb Italian wild mushroom risotto with, as you can see, very, very little effort. And now we're going to move on to another Italian classic recipe. This is a great favourite of mine. If it's made properly, it's wonderful, and it's called spaghetti with carbonara sauce. Begin by cooking the pasta in a very large saucepan of boiling salted water for about 8 to 10 minutes. We've seen sliced pancetta, here's the alternative. And for this recipe, 4 ounces has been cut into very small cubes and then tossed into a pan containing 1½ tablespoons of very hot olive oil. While that's happening, take 2 large eggs and 2 extra egg yolks, 4 tablespoons of creme fraiche and 4 tablespoons of pecorino romano cheese, which is sharper in flavour than parmesan. Then give everything a really good mix. Drain the pasta now and return it to the saucepan, then quickly stir in the carbonara sauce and the pancetta, coating the pasta in the sauce, which is now cooking in the heat of the pasta. Well, that's a nice, easy way to cook and serve spaghetti, but is there an easy way to eat it? Well, I think there is, and I actually think trying to wind it round a spoon is quite difficult. So I want to show you my method of eating spaghetti, which is to push it all to the side of the plate and leave a little gap like that, which gives you room to play. Then I think the secret is not to take too much. I think most people start by taking too much spaghetti. Now what we want to do is find a long piece here. That's it. So about that much altogether, then take it to the space on the plate, and then holding the fork down flat like that, just wind it around, pressing down so that you should end up with a nice sort of bite-sized piece of spaghetti to eat. Am I going to eat it? No, I'm not going to eat it. I'm going to say goodbye. That's all about soups and warm suppers, and I'll look forward to you joining me next time when we're going to be cooking game and poultry. Bye-bye. Hello and welcome again. This week's programme is all about game and poultry, and we're going to kick off with a recipe for chicken which I think is an absolute winner. It's full of the most sublime combination of ingredients, and one ingredient you might not have come across before, which I'd like to talk a little bit about, is this one here, and these are saffron stamens. And what you start off doing is taking ½ teaspoon of those and crush them to a fine powder with a pestle and mortar like this. Saffron is actually the stamens of the autumn flowering crocus, which is very appropriate. You just soak it before it goes into the recipe. And I've got here the juice of a lemon. So I'm just going to pour the lemon over it, give it a stir, and you can see already it's got the most wonderful pungent flavour, but also a lovely dramatic colour. As I said, this is a chicken recipe, and the chicken, first of all, needs to be jointed. Now, if you've got a nice friendly butcher who'll do that for you, that's probably the best way. But if not, it's quite simple to joint a chicken if somebody's shown you how. So I'm going to show you how. First of all, you need to have by you a really, really sharp knife. That goes without saying. But also, you might like to see these. This is a pair of scissors, kitchen scissors, that's got a special little dip in it here. And what that little dip does is makes it easy for you if you want to cut a bone. So a nice pair of scissors, a good sharp knife. Take your chicken. This is going to serve 4 people, and we want 8 pieces of chicken. So you start off by taking your sharp knife and making your first cut through what we call the parson's nose. This is about 3½ to 4 pounds, this chicken. So that gives you your starter cut. Then you turn it up and sit it up into a vertical position like that. And where you made your cut, you put your knife in, and then you go straight down the back with the knife all the way down to the bottom. Then you open the chicken out, open it out flat like that, and then you need to cut these 2 pieces in half, and you'll see here there's a little sort of very flexible breastbone there, and you put the knife in the middle of the breastbone and go right the way through. And so now we've got 2 halves of chicken. Turn the one half over like that and pull it. You need to stretch it right out. I'm going to turn it the other way around. Pull it right out, and then what you'll see here is a line, a natural line like that. So that's the next cut. Take the knife down that natural line. And you'll find that it comes away. You've got to be quite hefty with it. Now we've got 2 quarters. The next thing we want to do is 1/8. So we'll deal with this one first, and this is the leg and the thigh. Take the little bit of bone here off, and sometimes it's better to just pull that a little bit before you take it off. There we are. Turn it over this way up, And then you'll find another line where the drumstick sort of joins onto the thigh. You'll see another natural line there. So the next thing you do is put your knife through that. Now, all the little bits of skin can be trimmed away to make neat joints, and the little bits can be used to make stock. Now we're going to deal with this joint here, which is the breast and the wing. First of all, the little wing tip can come off, and that can go into the stock. And now you just want to look at that and think, well, what's an even portion? Like that. And then put the knife through that one. And if you find it a little bit difficult, get rid of the knife and switch over to the scissors. Sometimes you hit a bone, the knife won't go through, so just switch over to the scissors, and there you are. Right, well, once you've got your chicken jointed into 8 pieces, the next thing you need to do is brown them in some really hot oil. Now, I've got a pan here that's been heating over a gentle heat with some oil in it, and you brown the chicken 4 pieces at a time. You've seen I've actually already seasoned them here with salt and pepper. The reason this recipe has been created is because in the last series we did something called chicken basque, which was so popular. Everybody kept writing letters and saying, can you come up with something similar? And this is it. So we'll just wait now for those pieces to brown. Then as soon as the chicken has browned, you add a little bit more oil to the pan and you begin to cook the rest of the ingredients. And here I've got 2 yellow peppers and 2 large onions. And I want you to notice that they're cut into quite hefty chunks because they're going to have long, slow cooking. They need to be quite hefty to start off with, otherwise they disintegrate. Now, they've just charred and browned nicely at the edges. That's how I want them. The next thing I'm going to add is spices. And I've got a level tablespoon of whole coriander seeds, roasted and crushed as we did on the other programme, and a rounded teaspoon of cumin seeds. So they're going to go in next. Closely followed by 2 green chilies, and these have been de-seeded and chopped. And that'll give a nice little sort of kick to the whole thing. Here I've got the stalks of 2 packets of coriander leaves, just the stalks. The leaves are going to go in later. The stalks give a lot of flavour to this. And then I've got 3 cloves of garlic. Yes, 3, needs 3. And they've all been finely chopped. So I'm just going to give that a little mix in now. It's all beginning to look really colourful and exotic. And then more ingredients. First of all, chickpeas. Now these are chickpeas that have been soaked overnight, 6 ounces of chickpeas. And what you do is either soak them overnight or you bring them up to the boil them for 10 minutes and give them 3 hours soaking. Then, before they go into the pot here, they've got to be simmered for 20 minutes. They just need a bit of initial cooking. So these are the chickpeas which give it a lovely bite. That's followed by 4 ounces of basmati rice, brown basmati rice. It's got to be brown because this is going to have an hour's cooking eventually. So stir the rice in until it's all nice and glistening and coated with oil. And the next thing we're going to do now is see to the liquid for the recipe. And the liquid is, first of all, half a pint of chicken stock, and you can make that with the trimmings from the chicken. Now to that I'm going to add 1/4 pint of dry white wine, half a pint of stock, 1/4 pint of dry white wine. And then remember the saffron that we soaked in lemon juice, that goes in next. Wonderful, wonderful colour, isn't it? In goes the liquid. And then what I'm going to do now is add some lemon. Now, if you were in Morocco, you could get preserved lemons. They're not very easy to get here. So what I've done is I've got a thin-skinned lemon, and this is actually a Cypriot lemon. They're very nice. You need thin-skinned ones because you're actually going to eat the lemon. It cooks down. So what you do is put the lemon in with the rest of the ingredients, tucking it well down into the liquid. And then 2 more ingredients, 2 ounces of black olives. I know it seems like a lot of ingredients, but as I've said, You don't have to prepare any vegetables. The whole meal is all cooked in one pot. Now we'll just distribute the olives, and then finally the browned chicken that's been nicely browned, that just sits on the top. You preheat the oven to gas mark 4 or the equivalents, and it'll take exactly 1 hour to cook. And after exactly 1 hour, the way to test if it's done is to just take a grain of rice and a chickpea and just test it, bite it, see if it's done. And if it's done, this is Moroccan chicken. And all you need to do now, before it goes to the table, you remember we used the coriander stalks. Well, these are the coriander leaves. And then you just scatter those all the way over and take it to the table, by which time the heat will have melted them down. And that's just the finishing touch. And I hope you're going to agree with me when you taste that, that really is a winner. And now, closely following that is another one. You begin this one by cutting 2 chicken breasts skin on into 5 pieces. Place them in a bowl, then add a tablespoon of rosemary, a teaspoon of lemon zest, a crushed clove of garlic, and half a medium red onion. 3 tablespoons of lemon juice, and 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. Finally, a couple of bay leaves, and leave it for at least half an hour, or as long as you can, even overnight. When you're ready to cook the chicken, thread the pieces onto skewers with the onion and bay leaves, and then place them under a hot, preheated grill, and grill them for 20 minutes. This is really nice served with some puy lentils cooked with the other half of the onion and some red wine. Well, now we're going to move on from chicken to a real treat at this time of the year, and that is pheasant. And I want to show you a typical British recipe for poached pheasant with celery, another star ingredient. Later on, I'm going to show you how to carve the pheasant, so I want to show you now how to make that easier later on. And that involves taking off the little wing joints that are here. And what you do is you use your thumb and you go in with your thumb and feel around the joint. And what happens in here is it's a little sort of ball and socket. And you can feel it, after you dig around a little bit, you can feel it. And when you've got it like that, take a sharp knife and then just cut around it. So that if you cut all around that little socket there, the wing will come away. What you do then is you take those 2 little wings and you make some stock. This recipe has 3 stages. Make a stock, poach the pheasant, then make a sauce. And stock first, so the wings go into a saucepan, and then in goes the celery, some of the end parts. Onion next, 1 onion, cut in half. And then a carrot that's just been cut in chunks. And then I'm going to put in a bay leaf, 2 sprigs of parsley, nice stalky bits, because that's where all the flavour is, 2 sprigs of thyme, and 2 sprigs of rosemary. A few black peppercorns and a little bit of salt. And then that just needs 2 pints of water. And this will go onto the heat and bring it up to simmering point, and it'll take half an hour. Don't put a lid on. It'll take half an hour for you to get a good, well-flavoured stock ready for the pheasant. Then you strain the stock, put it into a larger saucepan. It's got to be large enough to hold the pheasant. And then you just season the pheasant with some salt and pepper, and you place it in the stock. It's really nice, this recipe, very easy, because you don't have to do any browning or sautéing. Just lower it into the stock like that. Then put a lid on as soon as it comes up to simmering point, and give it an initial poaching time like that of 20 minutes. Meanwhile, you prepare the celery, and what I've got here is the bottom half, the heart of the celery, and I'm going to trim it. What you do is you leave the root bit intact, because that's got lots of flavour in it. And this is actually the right way to cut celery for serving with cheese as well. What I'm going to do is cut it into 8 pieces, so it's in half, and then each half in half again, so that it ends up into 8 pieces. This is real comfort food, the flavour of celery and the flavour of pheasant. Now, after the pheasant's had its initial cooking time, you need to remove the lid and add another ingredient, and this one is shallots. And I've got 10 shallots here. These are rather pretty little shallots. They're from France, and they look like little buds. Very nice. So in go the shallots, and then the lid goes back on, and you give it another 15 minutes cooking. And after 15 minutes cooking, you then add the prepared celery, another 15 minutes, and then it's all ready for the next stage. When the pheasant is cooked, you remove it to a serving dish, and then you reduce the stock down to 1/3 of its original volume. And if you can see the line there, you can see that I've bubbled that and reduced it right down. And then when that's happened, you then make the sauce. The third stage of the recipe is to make the sauce. And to make the sauce, you start off with 3/4 of an ounce of butter. And then you melt the butter to the foaming stage. And then you add 3/4 of an ounce of sifted plain flour. And this is the sort of classic way to make a white sauce. People worry because they think it's going to be lumpy. Now, you've seen the flour go in. You've seen it mingle with the butter. And I hope you can see very clearly here, there aren't any lumps. Because once the fat and flour are melded together, you'll never get any lumps if you work properly at it. Now we're going to add the strained pheasant reduced stock little by little, using the wooden spoon all the time to keep stirring. Now when the stock first goes in, you will see lumps appear. But because the fat has been blended into the flour, it won't ultimately be lumpy. What will happen is, as you add this bit by bit, it'll go into a sort of ball, a soft ball, and then as you get more and more stock in, you'll find you'll blend it. So it's add a little bit of stock, blend, then add a little bit more stock, then blend again. And you can see here it's just all coming together. It's just the panic point is this. You put the stock in like that and you think, wow, that's never going to be a smooth sauce. But it is. All you've got to do is be patient and just keep stirring with your wooden spoon. And watch it, just watch it come back to smoothness. And then what you end up with is this beautiful, lovely, smooth, glossy sauce. Just turn the heat down now, let it cook for 5 minutes to cook the rawness of the flour, the taste of the flour out of it. Then finally, taste and check the seasoning and add the final ingredient, which is 2 fluid ounces of double cream. Turn out the heat, and the sauce is all ready now for the pheasant. Now I want to show you how to carve a pheasant. Insert a sharp knife as close as you can to the breastbone, slice it down, and then pull the meat away from the carcass, being quite firm as you do that. Then each half should be cut into 2. Serve the pheasant and the celery with the sauce poured over, and garnish with some celery leaves that have been first dipped in egg white and shallow fried. Well, we're just coming up to the party season now, so the next recipe I want to show you is a recipe for duck. And this is a duck terrine called rillette of duck. And you start off with 4 or 5 pounds of quartered duck. What you do is you just take the quarters and prick each one with a fork, because duck always has a lot of fat in it, and what we want to do first of all is to get rid of some of the fat. Season the duck joints and then put them on a roasting rack and pop them into the preheated oven, gas mark 6 or the equivalent. After 1 hour, this is what the duck will look like, turning a nice colour there. And then what you do is you take each portion of duck and pop it into a casserole, a flame-proof casserole, or you could use a large saucepan if you like. Transfer the duck over, and what I want you to see now is if I take the rack out, it's rather hot, so I'm going to protect my hands. I just want you to see how much fat has come out of the duck, and we don't want that to be in the rillette, so we're going to just drain that off and put it into a bowl. Don't throw it away, because it's absolutely marvellous for doing roast potatoes. Now I'm going to turn the heat on underneath the duck here, and add some more ingredients. First of all, I've got a tablespoon of chopped thyme leaves, which I'm going to sprinkle in. Then I've got 2 cloves of garlic, which have been roughly chopped. They're going to go in next. And a flavouring called mace. This is the outer coating of the nutmeg, which has been pounded down, and that's going to be ½ teaspoon. So we'll sprinkle that in. And then the next ingredient is this one here, 15 whole black peppercorns, and these are going to join them, and these are juniper berries. Now, they're going to go in with the peppercorns, and I'm just going to crush them up. If you haven't used juniper before, juniper berries grow wild, both in this country and on the continent. And the flavour of juniper berries, they're used in the making of gin. So if you think gin and you think juniper, you've got something about what the flavour is like. So crushed juniper berries and crushed peppercorns in next. And then we're going to add some liquid, and the liquid is in fact 8 fluid ounces of dry white wine. There's very little work involved in this, but there's quite a lot of waiting to do, so you need to start well ahead. 8 fluid ounces of wine, and then you put the lid on the casserole, bring it up to a gentle simmer, and you can go away if it's on a gentle simmer, and you leave it for just 2 hours. And after exactly 2 hours, the duck will have braised and become so moist that it'll just fall off the bones. So you just take a piece of duck out like that, then you take the meat off the bones, and what you need to end up with is little shreds of duck meat, and it's all beautifully moist, and it's all flavoured with juniper and wine and mace. And then, when you've done that, you pile them all together. It'll take you about ½ an hour to do that, into a tureen. This is a 1½ pint tureen here. And as you can see, that's a whole duck now shredded. And what happens is you pack it down very, very tightly with your hand. And then you pour in all the juices. You don't strain them, you just pour in all those lovely juices with all that flavour. Then you put a little bit of decoration on the top, perhaps a couple of bay leaves. And I haven't told you the whole story yet because it's going to have something else to go with it. It's going to have a cranberry confit to go with it. So put a little bit of decoration on it like that, which is juniper, cranberries, bay leaves. Then put the lid on. And you need to leave it overnight, and that's what's good about this, because you can make it in advance, leave it overnight, and then serve it with the cranberry confit, which I'll now show you how to make. Well, it couldn't be simpler, and it couldn't be lovelier. It really is absolutely divine. You've got the richness of the duck, remember, in the rillette, and then the sharpness of the cranberry confit is just the perfect partner to it. Now you start off in a saucepan with 8 ounces of cranberries. In they go. And then you add the juice and the zest of ½ an orange to join them. Because they're sharp, they need some sugar, so I'm using 2 ounces of sugar. And then a tablespoon of good quality red wine vinegar next. And then finally, 8 fluid ounces of red wine. Give it all a good stir, and then take them to the heat and let them simmer very, very gently without a lid, and you'll need to leave them there for an hour, coming back from time to time and just having a little stir. And then after 1 hour, all the juices will have evaporated, and you'll have this lovely thick mass of cranberry confit, which is beautiful to serve with any game and goes especially well with our rillette of duck. And now we're going to move on to another game recipe, and the game in question is actually venison, which is now available much more widely. And the recipe I want to show you is venison steaks cooked with a cranberry Cumberland sauce. And I'm going to show you how to make the sauce first. You start with a small saucepan, and into the saucepan goes, first of all, the squeezed juice of ½ a lemon and ½ an orange. And then here, the principal ingredient is cranberry jelly. And I'm going to use 2 tablespoons of cranberry jelly. Now, Cumberland sauce traditionally is made with red currant jelly and served very often with game. But I find that serving it sometimes with cranberry jelly just gives a little bit of difference, and it's really nice. What we're going to do now is take that over to the heat, turn the heat on, and just allow that to start to melt, the jelly to start to melt into the juice. And while that's happening, I just want to show you the rest of the ingredients. Now here I've got lemon zest and orange zest, and this has been cut into very fine little shreds. And I just want to show you how to do that. You use half the zest of an orange and half the zest of a lemon. And you take a potato peeler, and what you want to do is get that really just the outer zest and none of the white pith. And that comes off very easily with a potato peeler. And then, using a very, very sharp knife, you can put them up into little piles like this, and notice there's hardly any white there at all. Put the strips on top of one another like this, then take a sharp knife and just cut it into shreds. Now you're thinking, why can't I just grate it? Well, you can grate it, or you could even use a zester. But I just find cutting it, shredding it like this, which doesn't take all that long, just gives a little bit more texture to the finished sauce and wonderful flavour of citrus peel. Now the next ingredient, let's turn my heat down a bit because it's bubbling away too much. The next ingredient is this, which is root ginger. Not very attractive to look at, very knobbly, but having a lovely, fragrant ginger flavour. And use the potato peeler again to take the outer skin off, and then using a grater, what you need to do is grate about 1 teaspoonful altogether. So what I'm going to do now is just grate that. And if you hold it vertically, it comes off in little shreds on your grater. And then at the back, inside my grater, I've got about a teaspoonful. Now this is going to join the jelly, which by now will have melted into the juices. So that's next. And then after that, one more ingredient, which gives it a nice little bit of a kick, and that is mustard powder. And I'm going to use a slightly rounded teaspoon of mustard powder. And give that now a good mix. So that's the sauce ready. Couldn't really be simpler, could it? Very, very easy. What we're going to do now is just pour it into a bowl and leave it aside for a couple of hours. It needs a couple of hours for the flavours to develop. But first of all, it's going to have one very important ingredient, and that is port. And I'm going to use 3 tablespoons of port. If you want to, this is a very good keeping sauce. If you want to, you could actually make this 2 or 3 days in advance. Now what I've got here are 2 venison steaks, and I've got either a dessert spoon or 2 teaspoons of peppercorns that have been crushed with a pestle and mortar. And that's just going to give the venison a nice sort of crust, peppery crust. Turn them over, put some pepper on the other side, and then they're ready to go in the hot frying pan. And when you're cooking any steak, whether it's venison, you need to have the pan really, really hot so that the steaks can be seared. In they go then. Now the cooking times, if you like your steaks rare, are 4 minutes on each side. If you like them medium done, 5, and if you like them well done, 6. Right, now we're going to turn them over at half time. And we've got another ingredient here, and that's 2 shallots that have been finely chopped. So I'm just going to sprinkle those around the venison. Then just before you serve, when the time is up, you pour the sauce into the pan around the venison steaks. Now that looks like too much sauce, doesn't it? But what we're going to do is just let that bubble for a minute or 2. Just let it bubble down and reduce. And here it is, the lusciously thickened reduced sauce. Serve the steaks with the sauce poured over, and that's it. Venison with a cranberry Cumberland sauce. Well, that completes our programme now on poultry and game. Next time we're going to be cooking winter fish and shellfish, so don't forget to come back. Hello and welcome to a programme which is all about winter fish and shellfish. Now at this time of the year when the waters are cold, certain shellfish come into their own. Oysters are good, but they're quite expensive and hard to find. But their poorer cousins, the mussels, I think, are equally as good. And people obviously agree with me as more and more different mussel dishes are being served. Here at the London mussel restaurant, Belgo, they serve 3 tons of mussels each week, mostly by the kilo in a simple mariniere sauce. The mussels are delivered daily, mostly from Poole in Dorset, though some come from Scotland and Wales. Then the thorough preparation takes place through the night. The smaller mussels are used for the kilo bowls and the larger set aside for the platters of open mussels. The bag or the suspect are thrown away. At the height of the lunchtime rush, the chefs get through a skip of mussels, which is about 100 kilos in an hour. And now I'm going to show you our first recipe, which are mussels served on the half shell. And all that lovely topping that you can see in front of you is parsley and breadcrumbs, and also a little bit of Camembert cheese. A bit of mussel juice is spooned into each shell, and then a little bit of Camembert put on the top, and that would make a really nice first course with crusty bread. That's really good, that one. But we're working back to front today because what I want to do is show you how to prepare mussels before you cook them. And there are 1 or 2 really important points to remember. The recipe we're going to make in a moment is a recipe for 2 people, and you need 2 pounds of mussels. So let's just run through what you need to do. When you get them home, use them the same day you buy them. When you get them home, cover them with a damp cloth. Now sometimes they come ready scrubbed and cleaned in tubs or in polythene bags, but sometimes they don't, and if they don't, you have to clean them. And what you have to do is take a scrubbing brush and then just give them a good scrub under cold running water. And if you find these little sort of hairy bits that are sticking out, you just pull those off. These are sometimes called mussel beards, and they just need to be pulled off like that. Then when you've cleaned your mussels, you have to give them a little test to make sure they're going to be good. And the way you do that is if any mussels are open, like this one is here, give it a sharp tap. And if it doesn't close like that, then you discard it. And I've got a little bowl here of discarded mussels. So it might seem 2 pounds, might seem a lot for 2 people, but once you've discarded some, it actually is the right amount. Now, the recipe I want to show you today is a pasta recipe. This is linguine with mussels and parsley pesto. And I just want to show you how to make the parsley pesto, which instead of pine nuts is made with walnuts. Now you need to have a food processor or a liquidizer, and you start off with 1/2 ounce of walnuts, and these have been lightly sautéed in 1 tablespoon of olive oil, and they're going to go into the processor with every scrape of the oil they were sautéed in, because that's important. And then the parsley I'm using is actually 1 ounce of parsley. And this is the curly parsley, which seems to have a better colour for this recipe. Then 1 clove of garlic, peeled, some salt, some freshly milled pepper, and then 1 more tablespoon of olive oil. 1 more tablespoon of olive oil. The olive oil is important because it's what's going to send everything whizzing around. Then put the top on the processor, switch on, that is walnut and parsley pesto, and now we're going to move on and cook the mussels. Now over here in my cooking pan I've got a sautéed finely chopped shallot, a finely chopped clove of garlic, and that's been sautéing in another tablespoon of olive oil. And I'm just going to add some seasoning to that, some salt and some freshly milled black pepper. And then I'm going to turn the heat right up now, and in go my mussels. So in they go into the pan. Give them a stir around, and then one more ingredient, and that is 6 fluid ounces of dry white wine. Then heat down to medium, put a tight lid on, and they will actually take only 5 minutes to cook. Right, in 5 minutes the mussels will be cooked, the shells will be opened, and now what I'm going to do is remove them to a bowl and explain one very, very important aspect of mussel cooking to you, and that is what you can see in the base of this pan here is the juice that comes out of the mussels when they're cooked. And believe me, I don't know of anything that gives you that lovely fresh flavour of the sea better than that wonderful mussel juice, and that's why I don't like buying mussels that are already cooked, because you don't get that lovely juice. Then once you've removed them to a plate, you can then take the mussels from their shells, keeping the juice. If there's any juice in there, just keep it, and just remove the mussels to a little bowl like that. They'll come off the shell quite easily. Half the shell will go, and then the mussel will just come off. So carry on removing the mussels, and then reserve all the juice that comes out of the mussels, and then the next thing you need to do is strain it, because sometimes mussels have little bits of sand and grit in them. So when you've removed the mussels, the next thing you do is just take the juice over to a sieve, over a bowl, and what I've got in the sieve there is gauze. You buy little packets of gauze from the chemist, and that will strain all the grit away and give you the lovely juice ready for your sauce. The next thing you do is take about 8 mussels and leave them in the shells and reserve them as a garnish when you serve the pasta later on. Now, the next stage of the recipe is already happening here, and that is you reduce all that mussel liquor down to 1/3 its original volume, and then take the ready-made pesto sauce, add it to the juice, so you've got all that lovely flavour of walnuts, parsley and mussel juice, and then finally you add the mussels, and these are mussels that have been taken from the shell and just kept warm. Cover with foil, keep them in a warming drawer or somewhere warm until you're ready to add them to the sauce. Now we're going to move on from one star of the sea to another, and this one is monkfish. And this is what a monkfish tail looks like in the fishmongers, but you don't buy it like that. You always get the fishmonger to fillet it, and you take it home to cook like that. But before we cook the monkfish, I want to show you what we're going to serve with it. The recipe is pepper-crusted monkfish, and it's served with a red pepper relish. Ingredients for that are 2 red peppers, 2 tomatoes that have been skinned, a clove of garlic, and 3 anchovy fillets. And what you do to start off with is you chop the pepper into long strips, the way I've got them in my saucepan there, and then you use a tablespoon of olive oil and you just toss them around, get the heat really hot, toss them around in the oil until they become nice and charred and toasted at the edges, because what that does, that sort of charred bit at the edges, give a nice flavour to the finished relish. And then as soon as you've done that, as soon as they're all nicely toasted and softened a little bit, you add the other ingredients, which is the 3 anchovy fillets, chopped, 2 tomatoes, 1 clove of garlic. Stir that around. It's all very simple and very easy, and you don't have to skin the peppers. Remember, Shirley Conran said life is too short to stuff a mushroom, and I say life is too short to skin a pepper. So what you do then is put a lid on, turn the heat down, and let that cook for 25 minutes. Then, after 25 minutes, it's going to go into a food processor to be made into a puree. And here's the food processor waiting. So we'll just pile it all in, and then put the lid on and give it a sharp burst. And the lovely thing about this is it turns the most beautiful, beautiful colour. It's such an attractive sauce. It needs to be not too finely pureed, what I'd call a coarse puree. Take the blade out, and then all you need to do now is pour it into the dish you're going to serve it in. And as I pour it, you can see the texture and the wonderful colour. And I'm very, very sorry that I can't share with you the equally good aroma. Now we're going to put a little bit of freshly milled pepper in, because I won't put any salt before tasting it because we had salt in the anchovies, but I will put this in, and this is a tablespoon of balsamic vinegar. And that's just going to be lightly mixed in. And then when you serve this, you serve it as it is at room temperature. It doesn't need chilling and it doesn't need reheating. Now we're going to cook the monkfish. And you saw the piece of monkfish in the beginning. What happens to that is it's cut into 3/4 inch slices. And they're now going to be coated with peppercorns. And let me just explain the peppercorns to you. These are mixed peppercorns. They're green, black, pink, and white peppercorns. And I'm using 2 tablespoons, or 1.5 tablespoons, or 1 tablespoon. We've all been having an argument here as to how many you should have. I like it hot, 2 tablespoons. Some people like only 1.5, and some people, the faint-hearted, only like 1. So there we go. I've got 1.5 here, happy medium. Now that goes into 2 heaped tablespoons of flour, which contains a teaspoonful of salt as well. And you just mix the peppercorns. And what I didn't tell you was, of course, those peppercorns have been crushed coarsely. Mix that together, and then you just take the monkfish slices, little nuggets like that, and just coat it with the flour. What you need to do is make sure each piece has got a nice coating of pepper and flour, and then you need to have some really hot oil waiting in your frying pan, hot and smoking as this is, and in go your pieces of monkfish. And then just carry on like that, coating them. You'll probably need to do this in 2 or 3 batches. And then as you cook them, they need about 2 minutes each side. As you cook them, remove them to some kitchen paper to drain, and then just keep them warm while you continue cooking. If you've got a nice large frying pan, you should be able to do it in 2 batches. So we'll give those 2 minutes now, and then we'll have a look at the other side. Then after 2 minutes, just flip them over onto the other side. Then all they'll need then is another 2 minutes. So drain them, and then just sprinkle them with a little salt before you take them to the table. And here it is, the beautifully juicy pepper-crusted monkfish, served with a bright, vibrant red pepper relish. Not only looks good, but tastes divine. And here's another 5-star fish recipe. First, blend together anchovies, pitted black olives, sun-dried tomatoes, garlic, drained green peppercorns, drained capers, basil leaves, and some of the oil from the tomatoes. And that will make a sun-dried tomato tapenade. Now for the fish, you can either use tail ends of cod or haddock, weighing 6 to 7 ounces, dry them well, Place folded on an oiled pan, then spoon the sauce on top. Now dip basil leaves in oil and use these as a garnish on top of the fish. Next add an olive before placing the whole lot in the oven, gas mark 3. Then leave it there for about 20 to 25 minutes. And what you have is roasted fish with sun-dried tomato tapenade, and what could be easier? Well, now the winter is really starting to get a grip, I think it's time to spoil yourself and think of comfort food. Time to pack away the limes and coriander leaves, think of England, and make a good old-fashioned classic parsley sauce, because I still think this is one of the greatest ever sauces to serve with fish. And what I'm going to do is, last week I showed you how to make a classic sauce where you add the milk bit by bit or the juice bit by bit to the butter and the flour. But today I want to show you how to make the Cheats version, which is the all-in-one white sauce or bechamel sauce that we're going to put the parsley into. Now, you start off with 3/4 of a pint of milk to make the sauce. And what you have to do first of all is infuse the milk. So you put these ingredients in with it in a saucepan, a piece of onion, a bay leaf, a blade of mace, which is the outer casing of the nutmeg, some parsley stalks, some peppercorns and some salt. Bring it all up to just up to simmering point, very, very slowly on a low heat, and then pour it into a jug. And rule number 1, if you're going to make an all-in-one sauce, rule number 1 is it's got to be absolutely cold. So you just let those flavours infuse in the milk, and it'll take about half an hour to 40 minutes to get completely cold. Then we're ready to make the sauce. So then we're going to strain it back into the saucepan, leaving all the flavourings behind because they've done their work now. Turn the heat up to medium, and then you add 1½ ounces of butter and 3/4 of an ounce of sifted plain flour. Now that all goes in at once, because this is called an all-in-one sauce. And then you just go in with your whisk and begin to whisk the flour into the milk. And then as the butter melts, it'll blend with the flour and gradually disperse itself, blended with the flour, into the sauce and thicken it. You can see the butter now. It's beginning to melt. All you do is just keep on going with your whisk. Now, you can see that that's beginning to thicken, and it will have thickened sufficiently when it comes to boiling point. So I'll just take the whisk out now so that you can actually see it begin to bubble. There we are. Now the sauce is ready, except that you've got to just turn the heat right down low now, as low as it'll go, and let it cook for 5 minutes. Just let it simmer really, really gently. And if you can't get a gentle simmer, you should use a heat diffuser. And there we are. Here's your sauce. Here's your bechamel or white sauce. What we're going to do now is we're going to put some other ingredients into it. Just a little squeeze of lemon juice. About ½ teaspoon that would be. And parsley. 4 heaped tablespoons of parsley. And then the finishing touch would be a tablespoon of cream. And I've just got single cream here. Now I'll just blend that in. And if you pour that into a serving jug, turn the heat out now, pour it into a serving jug, take it to the table and serve it. It's lovely with oven-baked salmon, with oven-baked cod steaks, or with any poached or steamed fish. And there we are. Don't forget to taste it, to check the seasoning. We're now going to pour that over some fish, and I want to show you the rest of the fish and shellfish collection. There's only one word to describe this recipe: wow. This is mackerel with a very special stuffing. For the filling, I've used ready-made fresh pesto sauce mixed with mashed potatoes and spring onions. The fish is then topped with breadcrumbs and some of the pesto, then it's oven baked and served with a crisp salad. This is quite simply one of the best fish pies ever invented. It's called salmon kalibiak, and the crisp puff pastry encases a wonderful mixture of salmon, eggs, mushrooms and rice. This is another luxury fish pie, a mixture of white fish, scallops and prawns in a white wine sauce with a crisp cheese and potato rosti topping. This shallow fried fish has been coated in flour and grated Parmesan cheese, and it's served with a classic romesco sauce made with walnuts. Well, one recipe you didn't see there is the one I'm going to show you now, and this one's a recipe for smoked haddock. It's smoked haddock with a chive and butter sauce, and it's served on a bed of spinach. So, first of all, I want to talk a little bit about cooking spinach. You can buy it in packs ready washed. If it's not ready washed, you need to wash it in several changes of cold water and then pat it dry with a tea towel. It shouldn't be too wet. And don't be afraid of the amount of spinach. This recipe has 2 pounds, this is 2 pounds, and it looks enormous. But when it's cooked, it collapses down. Now what you can hear is butter sizzling in a pan, and I've got 1 ounce of butter, and when the butter's foaming and really hot, as it is now, it's just about ready now, then all you do is you begin to pack the spinach in on top of the butter. The one thing it doesn't need, spinach, is any water, because it's actually full of water. So start to pile it in on top of the butter, keeping the heat fairly high. And what happens is, as the spinach goes in, it'll begin, the first leaves that went in will begin to collapse, and gradually it'll begin to collapse down. Is it all going to go in, you're thinking? Yes, it is all going to go in. And I'll just tell you the history of the recipe I'm going to show you now. It was something I ate one day in my favourite restaurant, Bibendum, in London. And I was so impressed with it that I asked Simon Hopkinson, the chef, if he could give me the recipe to share with all of you. He said yes. He'd actually just invented it the day I ate it. He's a very clever man, Simon Hopkinson. And he's given me the recipe, and here it is. So you can see the spinach is going in perfectly all right. And when it's all in the pan, as it is now, what you can then do is just start turning it over and taking the bottom bits that have started to soften, as you can see here, bringing those to the top. We'll just get another spoon. And just turning it over so that all the raw leaves are gradually tossed down into the buttery juices at the bottom. And then you just go on doing this until your spinach is cooked, and it actually takes about 2 minutes altogether. Might take a bit more, but 2 or 3, let's say 2 or 3 altogether. Now, as I've already said, spinach is mostly water, and now you can see all that water has emerged, and the spinach has collapsed down into a portion each for 4 people. If you want to test that it's done to your liking, just bite a bit. Now what we've got to do next is just get rid of all that water. So have a colander waiting in the sink and take it over and pop it into the colander to drain. What you need to do is just put a plate on top of it and squeeze it hard to get all the juice out. Then the next thing you do is return it to the heat, and then take some kitchen paper and just wipe the pan clean, because we're going to use the same pan to cook the haddock. And what happens to the spinach is you squeeze as much of the water out of it as you can, then you put it on a serving dish, cover it with foil, and just put it in a warm oven, just a barely warm oven, just to keep warm. Right, now we're going to deal with the haddock. Just a little bit of spinach left there. And what I've got in front of me here is undyed smoked haddock fillets, and it's good to use the thick part if you can for this recipe. And these weigh about 6 to 7 ounces each, and they're going to go in the pan. I'm just going to turn the heat up a little bit underneath it, and they're going to be poached with a little bit of seasoning of pepper, not salt, because smoked haddock sometimes is quite salty. And then I'm just going to pour in half a pint, 10 fluid ounces of milk, and then that needs to come up to a gentle simmer, which will take a minute or so, and then you just poach it gently for about 5 minutes. And now we're going to make the butter and chive sauce, and I've got in my saucepan here 6 ounces of butter, which is really, really hot. And then in my processor, I've got 3 egg yolks, and the egg yolks have been seasoned with salt and pepper. I'm going to switch on. And then I'm going to pour the butter in really, really slowly. And what this is, in fact, is a quick way to make hollandaise sauce. It's very important to put the butter, after you've melted it, the hot butter, into a jug so that you can pour it in a steady stream like this. It doesn't work if you put too much butter in at the beginning. It curdles and separates. As long as you've got it in a jug like this and you can control that steady little flow, what we're aiming for is emulsification. Then when all the butter is in, finally add a tablespoon of lemon juice. And there we have a lovely thickened butter sauce, a hollandaise sauce made by the Cheats method. And we'll just get rid of the blade and transfer it now to the serving bowl here. And then it's going to have some more ingredients. Now that's too thick to serve as a sauce, so what we're now going to do is we're going to take it over here, change places with that bowl, and take the lid off the pan containing the smoked haddock milk and loosen it up by using some of this juice here. 2 tablespoons in, and then giving it a whisk with a fork. What you need to end up with is a sauce that has the consistency of single cream. So just give that a good mix. Yes, and that now is about the right consistency. And now all it needs is the star, which is the chives, and this is 2 tablespoons of chives. And then the sauce is now ready. You transfer the haddock onto a bed of spinach, pour the sauce over it, and the hot haddock will give the sauce a bit more warmth, and then it's ready to serve. And I think that's a fantastic fish recipe. And if you're watching, Simon, thanks for giving it to me. Well, I hope you enjoy all my favourite fish recipes as much as I do, and I hope you'll come back and join me next week when we're going to be cooking a real, proper, traditional Sunday lunch. For me, one of the real pleasures of the winter months is returning from a brisk Sunday walk and being greeted by something sizzling and spitting in the oven at home, not to mention the evocative aroma that greets you. That's the great British traditional Sunday lunch. But if you haven't cooked Sunday lunch before, sometimes it can be a bit daunting, so I want to take you through the paces step by step. So if we begin at the beginning, we need the principal ingredient, which is meat, and today we're going to cook Sunday lunch with the good old roast beef of Old England. Now let's talk about the cut first of all. If it's a really special occasion, I would go for a sirloin joint on the bone with the fillet still in it. But for a family Sunday lunch, this is the next bit down on the anatomy, and this is what's called wing end of sirloin. And it's actually ribs of beef. And if you want to serve, say, 8 people, 6 to 8 people, and have some left over, then you need about 6 pounds in weight. And if I can just show you that, that actually means, in terms of ribs, 3 ribs. And you can see the ribs here. And what happens is the ribs, the big bone across here has been taken out to make it easier to carve. but the ribs act as a kind of a rack for roasting, and they help to conduct the heat inside whilst the meat is cooking. So it's good to have them there, and that's why it's better to always have some bone in the meat. I think it's better for flavour as well. Now, before the meat goes into the oven, you preheat it to its highest setting. It needs a good blast, so just turn it to its very highest and preheat the oven. Then before it goes into the oven, I'm going to just put some flour on the surface of the fat here. And whilst we're talking about fat, I just want to say that you really do have to have the fat there, because what the fat does, it provides basting juices to keep the joint moist and succulent. And you don't have to eat it. If you don't want to eat the fat, you don't have to eat it. I actually like eating it. And that's why I'm putting the mustard and the flour on, is because mustard and flour, this is about a dessert spoon of mustard, when it's cooking, makes the crust of the beef really nice and crusty. So you want a good piece of fat on it. Now I'm just going to put some pepper and salt on there, and then it's going to go into a roasting tin. But before it goes into the roasting tin, I think it's very important to just have a little word about roasting tins. Please invest in a really good, solid roasting tin. And the way to test whether you're getting the right roasting tin is, obviously, it's got to look solid and feel heavy. One like that will last you a whole lifetime. But the real telltale giveaway is a little label, and that little label says, "Do not place over direct heat." If it says roasting tin and it says, "Do not place over direct heat," then for goodness sake, don't buy it. Don't waste your money, because that's what it is. As you'll see, as we go through our Sunday lunch, it's very important that tins can go over direct heat, and I'll show you why later. Now, in goes the beef, but first of all, I'm going to put an onion. One onion, cut in half like that, and rest the beef on it before it goes into the oven. And what happens is the onion will caramelize, and that'll make nice colour and juices for the gravy. And you'll need to cook it for 20 minutes at the high temperature. Then you take the temperature down to gas mark 5 or the equivalent, and you cook it for 15 minutes a pound if you like it rare, an extra 15 minutes if you like it medium, and an extra 30 minutes if you like it well done. And a 6-ounce piece, as I've said before here, 6-pound piece, will serve approximately 6 to 8 people. So in it goes for its first little blast of heat. Don't forget to put the timer on. Well, now we're going to have a look at preparing batter for Yorkshire pudding. And over here in my bowl, I've got 6 ounces of flour. And the flour has got to be sifted into a nice, large, roomy bowl. And lift the sieve up high. I said it before, but I keep saying it in case anybody didn't see the other programmes. And that's when you're using flour, it's packed in the supermarket into a bag, and it needs a good airing, because we want air in the Yorkshire pudding. Now, when you've sifted your flour, add some salt. And I think for Yorkshire pudding, it's quite nice to have some pepper in there as well. And then make a little well in the centre of the flour, and add 2 eggs. By the way, I hope I did say plain flour, because it has to be plain flour. And I've got a confession to make to you, that the other day I grabbed the nearest bag of flour out of the larder, made a Yorkshire pudding with self-raising flour, and it was quite a sight to see. It was absolutely flat as a pancake, and we all had to have little squares with our Sunday lunch. So you see, happens to me too. Now we're going to go in there with a whisk and start to whisk the eggs into the flour. What happens is, as you leave the whisk running, just move it around slightly, you'll find the flour begins to be incorporated into the eggs. And then there comes a stage when it gets a bit thick like this. So switch off, and then we're going to see to the liquid. And the liquid for a Yorkshire pudding with 2 eggs and 6 ounces of flour is actually 6 fluid ounces of milk and 4 fluid ounces of water. So you've got half a pint of liquid there altogether. And now the next stage is to gradually incorporate the liquid into the rest. So we'll switch on again. And because I need both hands, I'm just going to switch off a minute and put a cloth underneath the bowl there, because that'll steady it so that I've got both hands free. You don't have to worry about lumps, because the whisk will take care of all the flour and disperse it into the liquid. So just keep going, adding a bit more and a bit more. It can all go in now at the end. And then just give it a good whisk. And then if you want to, you can make it well in advance in your scheme for the morning, or you can make it at the last minute. I have tried it. I mean, there used to be old-fashioned cooks used to say you had to make your batter in advance and let it stand, but I've made it both ways, and I really honestly can't see any difference. So what I'll do with that now is just leave it aside, and then that's my Yorkshire pudding batter all ready to go into the tin later on. One of the secrets of really good roast beef is to give it a good basting. You'll see the fat begins to run, and if you keep basting it, the fat has a chance to keep the meat nice and moist and succulent. So what I do is I always give it 2 or 3 bastings during the cooking time. Right, now that's going to need half an hour's more cooking time, but before it goes back into the oven, what I'm going to do, you'll see now that quite a lot of fat has come out of it. So what I'm going to do is tip the fat to the corner of the tin and just skim it off into a bowl here. And if you take the fat from the beef and you make your Yorkshire pudding and your roast potatoes using the same fat as the beef, then the whole meal has the same kind of flavour attached to it. If you put roast potatoes in an alien flavoured oil, it's not the same thing at all. Now you don't want to take the juices out, just the fat. So what you can see there is I'm not taking any juices, just the fat. And that's going to be waiting now for the roast potatoes and the Yorkshire pudding. And the beef will just go back into the oven for another 30 minutes. Now the beef should be cooked, and we have worked out the timings very carefully for you, so you don't really have to worry about whether it's cooked or not. But if you are worried, you can just do another little test like this with a skewer. If you put the skewer in the thickest part of the beef, like that, press it down, and then just press it with your hand, you'll see the juices run up to the surface. And if the juices are just nicely pink and you like your beef cooked medium, then it's done. Now, the next thing you do is transfer it to a hot serving platter. Make sure that you get it nice and hot, like that. What you're going to do now is let the beef relax and rest for an hour while you do the potatoes and the Yorkshire pudding. Now don't worry about that, it won't get cold because it holds its heat. But let me explain to you the principles of why you should do that, why you should let it rest. What happens is when you're cooking beef is the blast of heat brings all the juices right up to the surface. And then when you take it out of the oven, if you let it rest, that gives all those juices time to sort of seep back down into the meat. And that's what's going to make it nice and juicy and succulent to eat. And the way to do that is to just cover it with a tent of foil, leave it in a warm place, and it'll be perfect in an hour's time. Now we're going to see to the roast potatoes. And again, here I've got another really good, solid roasting tray. And remember the fat that we spooned off the beef? Well, that's gone on to here now, about 7 tablespoons of fat, beef fat. And that's going to go into the oven with the heat increased now to gas mark 7 or the equivalent. And that's going to have 10 minutes in the oven to become nice and sizzling hot. And then it's time to put the potatoes on to boil. And they go in boiling salted water for 10 minutes. Right, after 10 minutes you drain the potatoes, drain the water off, then you put the lid on and use a cloth to protect your hands, and then give the whole thing a really good hefty shake. What they need is a bit of rough stuff, because what's going to happen is after you've done that, as you can see here, they go lovely and fluffy all around the edges, and it's that fluff when it hits the hot fat that gives you the crunch. That is provided you've got your fat really hot. And make sure when you're dealing with hot fat you have your hands well protected. And we're just going to get the fat out of the oven now, and then we're going to place it over direct heat. And now for the first time you're seeing why it's very, very important with roasting that you have really, really solid tins, because then they can go onto direct heat. The heat isn't high, it's only low, but it's going to keep it really hot while I spoon the potatoes in, because that does take a minute. So let's put the first one in now, and you'll see what I mean. As it hits the fat, big sizzle. So just spoon the potatoes in. And what I haven't said to you so far, and I must tell you, is the variety of potatoes I'm using. I think that red Desiree potatoes make the best roast potatoes. Now when they hit the hot fat, you then just tip it slightly, again protecting your hands, and give them a basting. Then you put them back into the hot oven, high shelf, and when you put them back in, pop the Yorkshire pudding tin in at the same time. Now the Yorkshire pudding tin has been preheated in the oven for 10 minutes with 2 tablespoons of fat in it. You take it out, put it again over direct heat, and then you just pour the batter in. You can see that's really smoking hot, and that's vital. So in it goes. And then back into the oven quickly, and it will take 40 minutes to cook. So now I'm going to give you a gravy lesson. There's no excuse for anybody to use those nasty old packets of chemicals, because we're now going to see just how easy gravy is to make. Now in the roasting tin here, I've removed the meat, and the next thing I'm going to do is, if you tip the pan, you'll see that the juices separate from the fat. And we want about 2 tablespoons of fat for gravy, so I'm going to take some of that off now and put it into my bowl, and just leave 2 tablespoons behind. So probably what I'm going to need now is about 2 tablespoons out of there. Then I'm going to take my wooden spoon and first of all just kind of release all these lovely crusty bits, because the crusty bits here are what give the gravy its nice rich colour and flavour. The onion can go, having given us that lovely caramel colour, so we'll get rid of that. And now, with the heat turned fairly low, I'm going to add flour. And I've got a heaped tablespoon of flour there. That goes in, and then you get to work with your wooden spoon, and you begin to blend the flour into the fat. And those of you who've been watching this series so far will have seen me make a white sauce, and the same principles apply here. If you've got fat and flour, you can blend them and make them smooth. It's only when you mix liquid with flour that you get lumps, and you can see all the little lumps disappear as you work with your wooden spoon. They all disappear into the fat, and they're gone forever. The liquid we're going to use is vegetable stock. Remember, we blanched the potatoes for 10 minutes, so I've got potato water here, but you can use any vegetable cooking water. And what you do now is you begin to add that just a little bit at a time, still working with your wooden spoon. Now, after you've added quite a bit of the liquid, it's best to get rid of the wooden spoon and then go in with one of these, which is a balloon whisk. If you want it thicker, add less liquid. If you want it thinner, add a little bit more liquid. And then you just need to have a taste add some freshly milled pepper. You might need some salt, you might not because there's salt in the vegetable stock. And then your gravy is ready to be poured into a warm jug and taken to the table. And here we have the roast potatoes and the Yorkshire pudding ready at the same time, but you remove the potatoes first because the Yorkshire pudding has to be served presto pronto at the last minute. So we leave that in for another minute or two while I just show you the potatoes. And this is what a proper roast potato should look like. It should be very crisp and crunchy on the outside. And I'm just going to lift it up and give it a tap so you can see. Crisp and crunchy on the outside, and lovely and floury and soft on the inside. Right, the last thing to come out of the oven then is the Yorkshire pudding. And what I haven't told you so far is that this is an 11 by 9 inch tin, and it'll make a Yorkshire pudding that will serve 6 to 8 people. But let me just show you what it actually looks like. It's nice and crunchy on the outside. And then it has a little bit of soft and squidgy on the inside, and that's how a Yorkshire pudding should be. And this is the best bit of all. Time to relax and enjoy one of the best Sunday lunches ever invented. I like to serve it with Brussels sprouts or one of the other lovely green vegetables that are available at this time of the year. And this is something a little different to serve with beef. This is horseradish, creme fraiche and grain mustard sauce. Still on the subject of Sunday lunch, how do you get really crisp, crunchy, crackling? Well, it really isn't a problem if you know how. Firstly, make sure the skin is completely dry, then score it through with a sharp knife. Sprinkle a tablespoon of salt crystals all over the skin and press it in. Then roast in a hot oven, gas mark 9, for 30 minutes, reduce the temperature to gas mark 5 and give it 35 minutes to the pound. Then it's going to look just like this. And a lovely way to serve it is with these little stuffed apples. They're coxes that have been filled with a mixture of pork sausage meat, parsley, thyme and seasoning. And then they're baked in the oven for 25 minutes when the pork comes out. Well, one thing you need to learn if you're not a seasoned Sunday lunch cook is never serve a first course, because otherwise you'll feel guilty then if you have an extra roast potato. But one of the things you really do need to have is, I think, especially when the weather's cold outside, is a proper pudding. And we in Britain are very, very good at making proper puddings. And I want to show you one now. This is sticky gingerbread puddings. They're made with apple and they're served with a ginger wine and brandy sauce. And we're going to start off with preserved ginger, which comes in its own syrup in a jar like this, and that's very widely available. And the recipe needs 4 ounces of that, so this is 4 ounces of stem ginger, and I'm going to chop it in the food processor, which is the easiest way to chop it. That's it, no more than that. Right, now that's ready for the puddings. If you don't have a processor, don't worry, you can sit down with a sharp knife and chop it by hand. Won't take too long. Right, that's ready. Now we're just going to make the mix for the pudding. And over here in my mixing bowl, I've started sifting flour, and I've got 6 ounces of self-raising flour. And if you've been wondering for the last couple of years, is there life after sticky toffee pudding? Yes, there is. This is it. We've worked very hard on this recipe, and I think actually it's better than sticky toffee puddings, if you can believe that. So 6 ounces of self-raising flour, and then, because it's an all-in-one method, more raising agent. And here I've got 3/4 of a teaspoon of bicarbonate of soda, and I've got half a teaspoon of baking powder. So that goes in as well. And then some spices, and the spices I'm using, here I've got a heaped teaspoon of freshly grated ginger. So that's going to go in. We'll give a nice fresh ginger flavour. And then I've got powdered ginger here. And what I've got here is 1/4 teaspoon of powdered ginger. If you can't get fresh, then just use a teaspoon of powdered. This is cinnamon, and this is 1/3 teaspoon of cinnamon. And the next one is cloves, and there's 1/3 teaspoon also of powdered cloves, which will give it a nice spiciness. Now I'm going to use black treacle, and I change my mind about how to measure black treacle all the time. This is the latest way, a tip given to me by a friend, and that is, first of all, you grease your tablespoon. We need a tablespoon here. Grease it with butter, put it into the treacle and get a tablespoon of treacle, and then take it over to your mix and use a good spatula and just slide it. Comes off beautifully like that, off the greased spoon. So that's the treacle, a tablespoonful of treacle. Then you've got to get it off the spatula. So we'll just do that. Tablespoonful of treacle. Next, I've got butter. This is 3 ounces of butter here, and it must be room temperature, really soft like that, so a knife goes straight into it. And then 2 large size 1 eggs, they go in next. What's good about this is it's an all-in-one mixture, so everything gets mixed up together. Next, I've got dark molasses sugar, and that's 4 ounces. And now, what I'm going to do is put a cloth under my bowl here to steady it and begin to mix that, and then there's 1 more ingredient needed. 2 more ingredients. The first one, start to mix first to just get everything amalgamated, and then the next ingredient is water, and it's 6 fluid ounces of warm water. So keeping the whisk running, I'll just gradually add the water. Now all that's going to need now is some apple, 6 ounces, not fluid ounces, 6 ounces weight of chopped Bramley apple. And you can see it's chopped into small dice. And then lastly, the ginger, the chopped ginger. Just fold the apple and the ginger into the rest of the mixture, and then it's all ready now for baking. And we're going to put it into these. These are 6 fluid ounce little metal pudding pots, and you'll notice they've been well buttered. And you need to fill them to about 1 inch from the top. And then they're ready to be baked in the oven. You preheat the oven to gas mark 4, line them all up on a baking sheet, put them on the centre shelf, and they should take about 30 to 35 minutes. But we do have some that are ready, so let's just have a look now. And the way to tell if they're ready is exactly the same way as a cake, actually, and just give it a press with your little finger like that. And if it springs back, as that is there, then you know it's ready. If your finger leaves a depression, then put them back in for another 5 minutes or so. Right, they can come out now. And then you leave them to settle and cool down in the tins for about 5 minutes before actually turning them out. Now I'd like to show you how to make the sauce that goes with the puddings. And in my saucepan, I've got 4 ounces of butter and 6 ounces of soft brown sugar. And this is not the molasses sugar this time. This is just the dark, soft brown sugar. And I'm just going to amalgamate those together and then add 1 other ingredient at this stage, and that is ginger wine. And you add 4 tablespoons of ginger wine, and then you keep the heat fairly low and leave it for about 5 or 6 minutes. Then, when all the sugar has dissolved, we're going to add 2 more ingredients. 1 is 2 tablespoons of brandy, which really does give the most wonderful flavour, the ginger and the brandy together. And then 2 more pieces of chopped preserved ginger, which have been chopped not quite as small as in the puddings, little bit larger than that. And I chop those by hand. And the sauce is now ready for the puddings. Pour the sauce over the puddings, and then you take them to a preheated grill. And the preheated grill is turned to its highest setting, and then you just put the puddings under the grill, about 4 inches from the grill, and the heat will reheat the puddings and at the same time give you a lovely toasted crusty bit on the top. So if you want a little taste of heaven now, here it is, sticky gingerbread puddings. And how do you follow that? Easily. Yet another absolute winner is chocolate bread and butter pudding. First, in a bowl placed over a saucepan of barely simmering water, melt 3 ounces of butter, 5 ounces of dark continental chocolate, 4 ounces of sugar and 3/4 of a pint of whipping cream. Now add 4 tablespoons of dark rum and just a pinch of cinnamon. Then gently whisk all this together. After that, remove it from the heat and then add it to 3 size 1 eggs that have been whisked together. To assemble the pudding, first spoon a layer of this mixture into a shallow oven-proof dish and arrange triangles of bread in it. Next, cover the bread with half the remaining mixture, put another layer of bread over the top and coat completely with the remaining mixture. Now cover and allow the pudding to stand for at least 24 hours. Bake the pudding in a preheated oven, gas mark 4, for 30 to 35 minutes. And now I have a promise. Chocolate bread and butter pudding is to die for. Well, that's it. A little bit of hard work. All you need now is a really comfortable armchair, possibly a football match, and a good, strong cup of coffee. Well, that's all from Sunday Lunches. Next time, we'll be celebrating the party season. Well, hello again. Now we're coming up to the party season. There's going to be a lot of entertaining happening. And I want today to show you how to entertain quite simply without too much last-minute work. We're going to do a first course, a main course, and show some really nice party desserts. But first of all, the first course. And this is something that's very special and can be made well ahead of time, not very much last-minute fuss and bother. This is blinis. Blinis are Russian pancakes, and they're very nice served with smoked salmon. But first of all, we're going to make the blinis, and in my bowl here I've been sifting 6 ounces of plain flour, but this has to be strong bread flour because blinis are made with yeast. And then to that flour, you add another flour, 2 ounces of, this is buckwheat flour. It's a fascinating colour, it has a lovely kind of nutty flavour, and that's going to be sifted to join the rest of the flour. And Russian blinis are made with all buckwheat flour, but I find that's a little bit heavy, so I find if you use 2 ounces, you just get the flavour, and the white flour gives a lovely light texture. So now to that, I'm going to add a teaspoonful of salt, mix the 2 flours together, and then the next ingredient is yeast. And yeast nowadays is very, very simple and easy to use. You can buy it in a packet like this, and all you do is sprinkle that in, 1 little packet of yeast, which is sort of powdered yeast, which blends straight into the flour, so you don't have to mix it first. Now that's all mixed together, we're going to need some liquid. And we start off, the liquid I'm starting off with is actually this, which is a 200 ml tub of crème fraîche. Now to the crème fraîche, I'm going to add milk, and I've got 8 fluid ounces of whole milk here, and that's been heated, but you've got to be careful when you're heating milk because too much heat kills yeast. So what you need to do is heat it to the stage where you can put your little finger in and hold it there for a few seconds without any discomfort. And that's just about right, that one. So now I'm going to add the milk to the crème fraîche and blend the 2 together, and then it has 1 more ingredient, and that is egg yolks. Now in the blini recipe, we're using 2 egg yolks, which I've got separated here, and I'm going to add this to this, and the whites are going to be added a little later on. The good thing about blinis is you can make them well ahead. Now that goes into the flour, and just whisk it in bit by bit until all of that has been blended with the flour. And what you end up with is a batter that's a little bit thicker than a pancake batter as we would know it, but a fairly liquid batter. Last lot in now. Now, when all that's thoroughly blended, what you have to do next is leave it aside for about an hour, and you cover it with a cloth and you put it in a warm place. Or you could put this bowl inside, say, a washing up bowl filled with warm water, and that would keep it warm. And then we'll have a look at it after an hour. As you can see, after an hour, it begins to bubble. And I'm always reminded when I watch yeast in action of Elizabeth David's words. She wrote this wonderful book about yeast cookery and bread making. And she said that however many times she tried to describe it, at the end of the day, yeast was still a mystery. You couldn't describe how it happened. And I think she was right. So next, you whisk the 2 egg whites up to the stiff peak stage like this and incorporate the egg whites to the batter. Then, as soon as all the egg white is folded in, you can have some more time off, go away, leave it in a warm place again, covered with a cloth, and that will take another hour to be ready for cooking. Then, after the second hour, the fun really begins, because then you can actually make the blinis. And what you need to make the blinis is a good, solid frying pan. Now, you need the heat at medium, and then you need to moisten the pan. And the way to do this is 3 sheets of absorbent kitchen paper, and I've just rolled them up into a wodge, and I've got 1½ ounces of melted butter here. And what I'm going to do is dip that into the butter, and then just lubricate the pan, because that's all it needs. It doesn't need any more butter than that. And now we'll make our first blini. Take a tablespoonful of the mixture, pop it into the pan, and then put ½ a tablespoon on top of that. So 1½ tablespoons for each blini. And then the blini will take about 40 seconds to cook on one side. You can tell when to flip it over because you'll find lots of little holes appearing in the surface. The bubbles, which we've been looking at, will begin to burst, and then it's time to flip the blini over. Right, now we're going to turn it over, flip it onto its other side, and then this time you count to 30 seconds. Now I know you're thinking, well, this is supposed to be simple. I'm not going to stand making blinis while my guests are waiting, but you don't have to, because they can be made early in the day, and then they can be warmed through in a low oven in foil. So the 30 seconds is just about up now. Lovely, fluffy, light blini. And what we're going to do with that is take it over to a cooling tray and allow it to cool off. This mixture will make 24 blinis altogether, but now I just want to show you another version, and that is, I'll just lubricate the pan again with the butter, and that is how to make mini blinis, because mini blinis have an important role in Christmas entertaining, and that is that they make good canapes. ½ a teaspoon in first, followed by another ½ a teaspoon on top, and this time about 15 seconds this time before that's ready to flip over. And what you can do is serve them warm with smoked salmon and a little bit of creme fraiche and some dill, and they're lovely to serve with drinks. And for a first course, I would serve 2 blinis per person, and 1 pound of smoked salmon would be enough to top 16 blinis. Well, that was a very easy first course. Now I want to show you an equally easy main course. This is lamb braised in Beaujolais, and you start off by roasting some vegetables, and you can do that quite early on in the morning, very well in advance. And to do it, what you do is put a roasting tray in the oven with 3 tablespoons of oil in it and preheat it to its highest setting in the oven, so it's really, really hot. So the vegetables, when they go into the fat, will hit some very high heat. This is more or less the way we roasted vegetables in the summer. And what I'm going to do now is add some vegetables to that very, very hot oil. And whilst I add them, I'll tell you what they are. I've got in my bowl here half a pound of carrots, half a pound of turnips, 1 pound of parsnips, and 1.5 pounds of potatoes, and 8 shallots. The skins are on the potatoes, and you'll see that they've all been cut more or less into the same size piece. You'll also notice there are these little fellows here, which are garlic cloves, and they're going in actually whole in their skins, 3 garlic cloves. Now what you do is just turn them around in the oil so they all get a good coating, and then give them a seasoning of freshly milled pepper and salt. Then you put them back in that very, very, very hot oven and pre-roast them for about 25 to 30 minutes until they become nice and toasted at the edges. So they're approximately half an hour in the oven, but you do need to turn them over at half time just to get them toasted on all sides. And this is what they look like when they come out of the oven. And as I said before, you can prepare this well in advance and just let them get cold and put them in with the lamb later on. And I'm just going to show you what to do with the lamb now. You need to have a good large roasting pan or braising pan, because you need room for a leg of lamb, which I've got here, and room for the vegetables to go round the edge. And this is now going to go into an oven preheated to the same temperature as the vegetables were, that is to its highest setting. But first of all, you put a little bit of olive oil, about a tablespoonful, over the surface of the lamb, because this helps to give it a nice colour. And lamb at this time of the year, which is bigger, as you can see here, more mature, responds really well to braising, and that's what's going to happen. It's going to be braised. First of all, I'm going to just put some seasoning, salt and freshly milled pepper, and then it gets an initial cooking at that high temperature for just half an hour. Pop it into the oven and leave it there for half an hour. Then after that initial 30 minutes cooking at a high temperature, remove the lamb from the oven and immediately turn the temperature down to gas mark 3 or the equivalents. And the next stage is to place the roasting pan over direct heat, and now it's going to have the Beaujolais. So you just pour the Beaujolais round the lamb, and I'm afraid it's going to be a whole bottle. But believe me, it's worth it, and it's going to serve 6 or 8 people. So that's really not very much Beaujolais in the end. Pour the Beaujolais round the lamb, then just sort of baste it a bit to start giving it some moisture on the top. And then I'm going to add some herbs, and I've got a teaspoonful of chopped fresh thyme leaves here. I'm just going to scatter those over the surface of the lamb. And I've also got a teaspoonful of bruised chopped rosemary leaves as well to give a nice flavour. Then we're going to return it to the oven for an hour and a half slow cooking, but first of all I'm going to give it a lid, and the lid in this case is going to be a tent of foil. So you take a large piece of double foil, make a little tent round the lamb like that, and then back it goes into the oven to sit happily and leave you to do other things for 1.5 hours. Then the only work you'll be required to do is, after 1.5 hours, just add the prepared vegetables, and then just add a few sprigs of herbs. I've got a bay leaf here, a couple of sprigs of rosemary, a couple of sprigs of thyme, and what I'm now going to do is recover that with the foil and tell you that you're now free for yet another 1.5 hours as that goes back into the oven. Now the final bit of hard work for you is just to finish off the sauce. You remove the lamb to a warm serving platter, put the vegetables round it, cover it with foil, let it relax, then you just put all the juices into a saucepan like this, let them bubble and reduce just a little bit, and then you add, first of all, a heaped teaspoonful of red currant jelly. Give that a little whisk into the sauce, and then you remember the garlic cloves that got roasted in the beginning in their skins. Well, what's going to happen now is the pulp the cooked pulp of the garlic cloves is going to be squeezed out like that and added to the sauce. So what you've got here is a sauce that's just very slightly sweetened with red currant jelly and then flavoured with cooked braised garlic. There we are. Now just give that a final whisking and your lamb in Beaujolais is all ready to serve. If you're cooking for parties, one of the most important things you need to think about is what to serve for the dessert, for the grand finale. And today I want to show you what must be, I think, one of the best chocolate recipes ever. This is called fallen chocolate soufflé. It's called that because it does tend to sink slightly when you take it out of the oven. Also, I think the name fallen probably has other connotations to it as well, because you've got to be pretty fallen to eat this. It's really, really wicked. Well, first of all, you deal with the chocolate. The chocolate has to be melted. And to do this, you put a pan over a gentle heat with about that much water in it, just bubbling slightly on the base, like that. Barely simmering is the expression. Then on top of that, you put some butter, 4 ounces of butter in a bowl, and this is followed by 7 ounces of chocolate here. And this chocolate is the most chocolatey chocolate you can buy, because it has 75% cocoa solids. And when you buy chocolate to make this dessert, if you want it to taste really good, make sure you get that kind of quality chocolate, because that's going to make a difference. Always put the butter in first, so that the chocolate can kind of melt down with the butter. It's quite tricky working with chocolate. It's very difficult if you overheat it. So if you keep that much water and only that much heat, then naturally, over a period of about 10 minutes, that will melt down to a liquid consistency. And then you add another ingredient. We are getting near Christmas now, and the other ingredient is 1 tablespoon of Armagnac. Armagnac features in this dessert, and I'm going to show you now where else it's featured. This fallen chocolate soufflé has prunes in it. It has 12 ounces of, these are called no-soak prunes. They're sort of fairly soft, but I find it's best to give them some soaking. So what I do is put them in a 1/4 pint of water, bring them up to simmering point, then remove them from the heat and pour over 5 fluid ounces of this, which is Armagnac, and leave them overnight. And then the next day, the Armagnac has seeped into the prunes and they plump up like this and look really luscious, and they taste wonderful. Now, to make this chocolate soufflé, you start off in a mixing bowl, 4 egg yolks and 4 ounces of caster sugar, and it needs to be whisked until you get ribbon trails falling. Now that does in fact need about 5 or 6 minutes. And what should happen is the mixture should leave little ribbons going back down into the mixture like that. Then the next thing you need to do is remove the beaters from the whisk, and they've got to have a good thorough washing to beat up the egg whites. But before you beat the egg whites up, go and see how the chocolate's doing. And the chocolate, when it's melted down into the butter, will have turned to a liquid and be really nice and glossy like that. And that's ready now to be folded into the rest, so we'll take it over here. But first, that very, very important ingredient, which is Armagnac. So 1 tablespoon of Armagnac, and then that is going to be added to the rest of the mixture. Then as soon as the chocolate is folded in, we're going to add some of the prunes, and I've counted out 18 prunes and sliced them in half, and they're now going to be folded in so that the mixture, the soufflé, will have lovely squashy, squidgy lumps of Armagnac prunes in it. And now, the next stage of the recipe is to beat up the egg whites. Now you don't want the egg whites too overbeaten, just to that sort of soft peak stage like that. And then what you do to fold them in is take 1 tablespoon first of all, like that, and just fold that into the mixture to loosen it. Because what happens when you add the chocolate to the egg mixture, it thickens up. So if you add this 1 tablespoon of egg white first, that softens it up and makes it easier to fold the rest of the egg whites in. So as soon as all that white has gone, we'll start to add more. And folding is just folding and cutting movements like this, moving the bowl around, cutting through the mixture with the spoon, and then turning it over. Right, now the mixture is actually ready to go into the baking tin, but I'd just like to tell you a little bit about that first of all. It does need a lining, but lining is a little bit easier these days because now you can buy rolls of ready cut lining paper and base papers that are already cut to the right size. Now the size we're using today is an 8-inch, and this is a springform tin. And what I'm going to do is first of all put the side lining in, and you just fold the corner over like that, the edge over, snip it with the scissors all along, and then it'll fit inside the tin very, very easily like that. Then take the base paper and pop that in on top, and now the tin is ready to have the mixture. So in goes the mixture next using a spatula, and the oven temperature to cook this is gas mark 3 or the equivalent, and it'll take about 30 minutes to cook. So here it is. Why is it called fallen soufflé? Well, the reason is that when it's cooking, it puffs up quite a bit, and then when you take it out of the oven, it sort of sinks back down. But now it's going to have a sauce to serve with it, and the sauce is very simple. If you remember the prunes, I took 18 out of the quantity, but the rest have been pureed in a food processor, or you can use a liquidizer, to a puree. And now I'm going to add this, which is 5 ounces of creme fraiche. And just fold that into the prune mixture. Now, if you can't get creme fraiche or you don't want to use it, you can use lightly whipped double cream. And that goes for all the recipes I use with creme fraiche. But I actually think the lightness of it and that slight acidity adds something extra to recipes, and that's why I use it. Now, don't fold it in completely. What you want is this lovely sort of marbled effect of cream and prunes, which looks very, very pretty. There we go. Now we're going to cut it, and I'm going to show you what it looks like inside. And if you're one of those people who really enjoyed making truffle torte, and now you've got a bit bored with it, time to move on. I think this is even better than truffle torte. And watch the portions, because it is very, very rich, so not too big a portion. I think this altogether will feed probably about 8 to 10 people, even if they are chocoholics. This is quite rich. So there we are. Cheesecakes are always great for parties, and here are my top 3 for the winter collection. This one here is banoffee cheesecake. This is made with fromage frais with chunks of banana folded in, then topped with toffee sauce and toasted pecan nuts. This is a lemon ricotta cheesecake, very light and fluffy, and served with a confit of lemons, so it's very lemony. More chocolate, this time a velvety mascarpone chocolate cheesecake with fruit and nuts and topped with chocolate curls. These egg whites, 2 egg whites, beaten to the soft peak stage, are going to make that famous Italian recipe called tiramisu, which in English really is coffee trifle. And now I'm just going to switch the egg whites around for this, which is the main ingredient. It's a wickedly wonderful ingredient, and it's called mascarpone, and it's thick Italian cream cheese. It's absolutely divine. Now, when it comes out of the tub, there's 8 ounces there. It tends to be rather stiff. So first of all, I'm just going to break it down with my whisk to soften it. And then in my jug in front of me, I've got 3 egg yolks, and the egg yolks have been beaten with 2 ounces of caster sugar for 3 minutes. And you can see there's hardly any egg yolk colour there. That's because all the air's been beaten in and the colour has gone, and so they're really pale. So that's how you need it to look. And that goes in with the mascarpone, and I'm going to switch on again and just blend all that together. And then as soon as that's thoroughly blended, I'm then going to incorporate the egg whites. Right, now the egg whites can go in, and they're going to be actually folded in. First of all, take 1 tablespoon of egg white and slacken off the mixture so it makes it easy to fold, and then fold in the rest. And if you're using raw egg yolks, as I am here, and you're worried about using them, then don't give tiramisu to very small babies or very old people, but that's only if you're worried. Now the rest of the egg whites, and that'll be ready. Just use folding, cutting movements. And what you end up with is a beautiful, light, foamy mousse mixture. And there it is. Now the next stage of the recipe is the coffee. And you need 1/4 pint of very strong coffee, and I've got this lovely little espresso machine. I love espresso coffee, and it happens to make 1/4 pint. But if you don't have an espresso machine, then don't worry, just make very, very strong coffee, whatever coffee you like. I've actually got espresso coffee here. And then to the coffee, we're going to add another ingredient. This is 3 tablespoons of dark rum. And then the next ingredient is chocolate, dark bitter chocolate, 2 ounces altogether. And what you need to do is chop it into shreds like this, very, very thin shreds. And then when you've chopped the shreds, you just go across with the knife like that, so you've got even smaller shreds. And 2 ounces altogether. Now, you can make tiramisu, if you like, in a large 3-pint dish. But I think it's nice to serve it in individual servings. So I use 6 7-fluid ounce glasses. The next ingredient are these, and these are called boudoir biscuits. And for this recipe, you need 24 of these. And what you do is you break them in half. They're quite crisp. Break them in half, and then just dip them into the coffee and rum mixture. And start off by, they go soft very quickly, so don't leave them in too long. Start off with 3 pieces in the base of your glass, like that. And then you take a tablespoonful of your mascarpone mousse mixture and put that on top. Then you have a sprinkling of chopped chocolate on top of that. And then you put more biscuits in. Another tablespoon of the mascarpone mixture on top. More chopped chocolate over the top of that, giving it quite a good covering. And then finally, we're going to have a sprinkling of cocoa powder, and that is Italian coffee trifle or tiramisu. Well, I hope you'll enjoy those entertaining and party recipes as much as I do, and I hope you're going to come back and join me again next time when we'll be cooking some cold weather comfort food and casseroles.